Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the CANI Climate Action International Education Summit. My name is Ailsa Lamont, and I'm your MC today and one of the co-founders of the network, CANI, the Climate Action Network for International Educators. And along with Pitulia Nakula in New Zealand and many others, a motley collection of international education professionals around the globe, we set up CANI late last year because we saw the need for our sector to step up and do more to tackle the climate crisis. And we also recognized a growing demand for a forum on which people could come together to share their ideas and work out ways to balance the often competing needs of internationalization and climate action. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have this event today and that so many of you have chosen to join us. We have more than 200 people signed up for this event today, and that's for this Australia-New Zealand timed session. We have another 300 who have signed up for the session, which will be taking place in the middle of the night, timed for the American-Canadian daytime operating hours. So this really is a global summit, and we had planned to make this a virtual event right from the beginning, partly because we wanted it to be a sustainable event, but partly as well because we wanted so many of you to be able to join us. And of course, little did we realize when we started planning that by now the whole world would be experts in how to use Zoom. So we really have got a very packed program for you today, and we are not professing to have all of the answers about how to respond to the climate crisis in international education, but we do hope that with this event, we can offer a platform and a forum to kickstart the conversation and to really get more action happening. Now, although this is a virtual event, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. And on behalf of those present, I would like to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and to their elders emerging past and present. And I extend this acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the lands from which everybody is gathering. And I also pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of Australia. And I hope that the path towards reconciliation continues to be shared and embraced. And I would now like to cross the Tasman virtually and go to Hawke's Bay in New Zealand. And I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Putera Hakiwai, who is a Maori culture and language expert who is going to kick us off today with a welcome in Te Reo. Thank you.
Kia ora. Mai e te tipua, mai e te tawhito, mai e te kāhui o ngāriki, mai e tā whiwhiki ngā tua. Oi ka takina te Māori ko te Māori āhua noa ki runga ki e nei taura, ki runga ki e nei tauira. Kia tau te Māori ki runga ki e nei tauira he tukuna no te whai oro a tāne te waiora. Tēnei te matatau kai ke whakatū tārewa ki te rangi. Uhi wero tau mai te Māori haumi e, hui e, tāi ki e. A kāti ko te mihi tuatahi, kia rangi nui e tū iho nei kia papatua nuku e takoto ake nei. Atu i a rāua kārere te ia o ngā whakaaro. Kia rātau mā kua māwehe atu i te tirohanga kanohi. I te rā, te wiki, te marama i te tau. E mea ana te kōrero, he kitenga kanohi, he hoki ngā mahara. Nō reira ka ora, rātau i roto i a tātou, i roto i a tātou mahi, i roto i e nei momo wānanga. Nō reira e ngā mate, ko rātau ki a rātau, ko tātou e pai nei ki a tātou tēnā tātou. Anō ku te whiwhi kua riro māku koutou, tātou e whakatau, māku tātou e mihi i tēnei rangi. Nō reira e mihi ana. E mihi ana kia koutou katoa, kia tātou katoa. Te hunga ora, ahakoa ngā here, o te noho rāhui I konei, ko ngā mihi tēnei atu I konei Aotearoa, kia koutou I ahi te reiria, me te mōhio anō hoki ka whakatūngia tētai anō kaupapa e pai ai te mātaki a te hunga I Amerika I kānata a tōna wā. Nō reira tēnā tātou. I tēnei muka o te ao ki tō muka, ko te aroha tēnei o te ngākau e mihi atu nei kia koutou katoa. Ahoa no tēnā tātou I tā tātou kaupapa. I te oranga o te tai ao, me ngā kaupapa ka wānanga tia. E tika ana kia mihia ngā kai kōrero matua. Ngā kai kōrero matua, ko whakawātea, koutou ko whakawātea I a koutou anō ki te kauhau, ki te hunga e hia kai ana, ki o koutou mōhiotanga e tūohu ana. Nō reire e mihi ana kia koutou. Hoi anō, koera noi ho tāku I tēnei wā, mai a mātou e ngā tangata whenua o Aotearoa tēnei e mihi ana kia koutou I tēnei rā. Huri noa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. And I will now hand it back to you, Elsa.
Ngā mihi nui. Thank you, Peter. That was fantastic. I think that's got us off to a great start, and I really appreciate you taking the time to kick off our summit in such a fantastic way. And I think it's a great reminder of the need for us to approach this problem in a way that shows respect to everybody in the world. We have an interconnected world, and we're not going to get out of the mess that we've got ourselves into without recognizing that, and that we need to follow perhaps a new path. And perhaps COVID-19 actually gives us an opportunity to reset our direction. So that's part of what we're going to look at today. And before we move on, I'd like to just do some basic housekeeping. If you do have any issues, any tech issues, if any audio doesn't work or the screen freezes and all of a sudden the speakers look like this, remember, don't take a screenshot and tweet that. But the way to sort that is to get onto the chat and start and let us know, because we do have a team behind the scenes who'll be able to work on that. So any problems, get in touch through the chat. If you do get kicked out of the webinar for any reason, you can use the same link to get back in. But hopefully there won't be any issues. Now, this is a virtual event, and we recognize that a virtual event is not just a normal, traditional face-to-face conference that you turn into an online thing. You have to actually think a little bit differently about how to set it up. So we have a lot of speakers today in very short, snappy sessions that we hope will keep you engaged and hold your attention. But we also want this to be about you. We want to use this as an opportunity to learn more about you, to find out what matters to you, and therefore how CANI can evolve and grow to support you in your efforts to take more climate action. So we will be using a lot of different interactive tools today. I've mentioned the chat function, please go for it. We will also be using it to share a lot of useful links and URLs throughout the day. Use it to introduce yourselves. I think that's already starting to happen. We will also be running a series of polls, partly because we're nosy and we want to know what you think, but also to make sure that we can actually find out more about what you really need. So we will be asking you questions, so get ready to submit your answers in a few minutes. Also, for our incredible range of speakers and panelists, you will have the option to submit your questions through the Q&A function. Now, we know that some of you might actually also put your questions in Q&A. That's fine too. We're monitoring everything so that hopefully we can pick up all of the questions that you are interested in, so we can put them to our speakers. Okay, so let's move on to our first poll to see if we can actually test this. Okay, so our first question, if we can go to the first poll, is which aspects of climate action in international education interest you most? Now, just a reminder as well that we are recording this event, and you will be sent a link to the recording afterwards. So please feel free to come back and don't feel you have to take any notes during this, because the recording will be there for you. The polls do not get recorded, do not get captured in the recording, so we will be repeating the questions for the benefit of people watching later. So the polling question is, which aspects of climate action and international education interest you most? And it's a multiple choice where you can choose a maximum of 3. And the possible options are reducing greenhouse gas emissions caused through student travel, reducing greenhouse gas emissions from international office operations, educating international students about climate change, incorporating climate issues into study abroad and short-term programming, using your purchasing power to influence behavior with suppliers and partners, and leadership and driving change in your workplace. Okay, so I think you've had enough time. We've got a lot of answers in now, so let's end the polling and see what our results are. Okay, fabulous, that's interesting. So I think from here we can see that we have a couple of clear winners. A lot of you, more than half of you, are very interested in ways to incorporate climate issues into study abroad. Many of you are also interested in reducing greenhouse gas emissions from student travel and from international office operations. And a large number are also interested in purchasing decisions and educating international students about climate change. So that's fabulous, that's very useful. And luckily we are covering all of those topics today. So that's good, we know that the polling is working. That is a good start, and we're very pleased to have that here, have this option. So there will be more polls coming, so please stay tuned. Now we have a couple of other ways that people can interact with the summit and with CANI. So please do tweet and use social media. We have our own hashtag for today, CANI Summit 2020. So do get tweeting. And just a reminder on some basic social media etiquette. If you are tweeting and capturing a screenshot of any of the speakers, do try to pick a good picture of them, you know. Think of it as if you were taking your own selfie. Just a wee request. Thank you. Also, we have set up a discussion forum on LinkedIn, and we'll be putting the link to that, the URL, in the chat. Now, we would really invite you to please join that group, and also invite your connections to join that group, because this is an ongoing forum where we really want the conversation to continue beyond today. We've been able to pull together a program which has an incredible range of different speakers, some of whom are already working on these issues, and some who are simply looking at ways to incorporate climate action into their work. So we're sure that we haven't yet captured all the great work that's out there. So please do use the discussion forum. And I'd like now to thank our incredible sponsors, without whom we wouldn't have been able to get this event off the ground. So firstly, a huge thank you to the Climate Reality Project Australia and Pacific, who teamed up with the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation in Melbourne to offer a series of climate action collaborative grants, and that's what got this event off the ground. Following which, we also are delighted to have been able to bring in Education New Zealand and the University of Auckland as event sponsors. And we have so many other event partners who have really helped us promote the event, and with other bits of support, such as organising student videos or developing our logos. A huge thank you to Swinburne University of Technology, from whose campus I'm broadcasting today, to the International Education Association of Australia, to Edukudu, to CAPSI in Canada, and to Austrade, AIEC, Settled Services. There are so many organisations that have given us support. So we will be spending some time at the end to have a more detailed thank you and credit section where we can say a huge thank you to everybody. But now I want to get to the main meat of the day, and I'd like to mention our programme. So we have got, as I said, a range of speakers, and I'm delighted that we've been able to bring together people from the international education sector and people who are experts in sustainability and climate change action. And this is not necessarily a group that regularly mixes. So I'm delighted to have such an eclectic blend of people here today, and I fully expect that great things will come out of that. So I'll move on now to just set the scene for how we've actually designed this program. So we designed it to mirror a kind of possible framework for climate action, which follows a few different steps. And the first one is simply acknowledging the problem, acknowledging that we in international education contribute to greenhouse gas emissions through some of our operating models. And then looking at ways that we can reduce or eliminate those emissions wherever possible. So that could be by virtual recruitment, or a greater emphasis on transnational education, digital marketing, virtual study abroad and internationalization at home, for example. A second prong of our proposed framework for climate action is to think about the ways that we can use our global connections, our reach and our purchasing power to influence the people that we engage with, be that our institutional partners around the world or our recruitment agents we work with, and of course, advocating for change within our own organizations, institutions, and workplaces. Last but not least, of course, we come to students themselves, international students and globally mobile students from our own home countries. And there are so many ways in which we could incorporate climate action and sustainability and climate action literacy into the ways that we do study abroad, that we think about employability initiatives, for example. And so we've tried to cover off some of these different approaches throughout the content today. And last but not least, we will be wrapping up with a leadership panel where we've asked some of the foremost thinkers and leaders in our field to put their considerable brain power to the task of imagining what a more sustainable international education sector might look like in future. So an incredible range of speakers that we have for you today, and I'd now like to hand over, introduce our first speaker, who is our keynote speaker, Professor Robin Shields, who is Professor of Education at the University of Bristol in the UK, who has done some really groundbreaking research into the emissions associated with international student mobility. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Robin Shields, and I'm a Professor of Education at the University of Bristol. Even though we're separated by time and by distance, I'm very excited to be speaking with you today, and I'd like to thank the conference organisers for making that possible. I'd welcome your thoughts and feedback via Twitter at Robin Shields, or through other conversations that happen in the course of the conference. My title today is Between a Rock and a Hard Place, Finding a Way Forward for International Higher Education. By this title, I mean that higher education is facing two sets of difficult challenges in terms of internationalization. The first is that current models of internationalization are not sustainable. And I mean sustainability here in a broad sense, encapsulating many kinds of sustainability. The first is in relation to climate change. So there are about 5 million students who go to another country for studies in higher education every year, and most of them travel by airplane, and this has an immense carbon footprint. So in one study, I've estimated that this is between 14 and 39 megatons of carbon emitted into the atmosphere every year, which is comparable to the entire emissions of small to medium-sized countries. So this is obviously a large challenge in terms of sustainability. We cannot keep flying people around the world in the way that we have up until now and escape the very worst effects of climate change. Now, air travel is actually a relatively small component of global greenhouse gas emissions. It's less than 5%, but it is also one which is very unequal. So, for example, one long-haul flight, just a one-way flight, often produces more carbon than an individual in a low-income country will for the entire year in their lives. So there's a big inequality between those who are able to be mobile and those who are not. A second sense in which internationalization is not sustainable is in terms of skills and the job market. So universities pride themselves on equipping their graduates to be successful in a job market which is embedded in an economy which is fundamentally unsustainable. It's heavily reliant on carbon-based energy and environmental consumption which can't be sustained over the long term. The third way in which internationalization is not sustainable is in terms of inequality and access to higher education. So the ability to access international, or the ability to study abroad, is largely determined by the ability to pay often higher tuition fees than students within the country of study will pay. And although there are scholarships available, many or most students have to be able to fund their own studies. This circumvents national policies which might emphasize equity of access for different groups or by gender, and so increases inequality over time. Third, the coronavirus crisis has highlighted that internationalization is not sustainable in terms of institutional funding and finances. So higher education institutions are generally supposed to be durable over long periods of time, but international enrollments can fluctuate wildly from year to year. Until now, this fluctuation has mainly been a pattern of growth, so it's benefited universities, and many have come to rely on international student enrollments as a core aspect of their financial model. However, the current crisis shows how what goes up can also come down, and so many universities are facing a large hole in their budget and looking at cutting staff numbers over the coming years due to fluctuation in international student enrollment. So this is another sense in which internationalization as we know it today is not sustainable. However, the other challenge is that international higher education is increasingly necessary. One reason is that there is a growth in right-wing nationalist and populist movements around the world. I am speaking to you today from the United Kingdom, and we certainly had our share here. These movements often embed racist or sexist ideologies and aim to pit different groups, national groups or ethnic groups, against one another. And so international higher education can help promote understanding between different nationalities, which can resist these movements or challenge them. The second is that there are many global challenges, such as climate change, such as the refugee crisis, that require cooperation between different nations, and international study can lay a valuable foundation for individuals to work across national borders and to work with different nationalities throughout their lives. So it's very necessary to face these challenges. And third, there are many well-documented benefits to international education, both for individuals and for universities. For individuals, these benefits include self-confidence, improved communication skills, greater tolerance towards other groups, and employability, better outcomes in the job market. For institutions, benefits include access to new curricula and also new research opportunities. So we are currently between a rock and a hard place. We have these two challenges, and so the question is, how do we move forward? I've outlined four very brief hypothetical paths forward that we could take, and I'll discuss them briefly. The first would be, following presumably a downturn from the coronavirus over the next year or two, to resume business as usual, or to try to revert to the methods of internationalization that we've been doing. This will be tempting because it will offer a source of revenue for universities, but over the longer term, it's almost certainly unsustainable. The current levels of greenhouse gas emissions that we are producing as a global society will almost certainly result in catastrophic climate change if we don't address this, and universities will certainly suffer from those effects. The second would be to move to more sustainable forms of provision. So to look at how we can offer courses by distance education, hold academic conferences online, such as this one, or perhaps work in partnerships to deliver courses overseas. The courses would then be sustainable, and we'd be kind of highlighting a sustainable model of provision, but we would still be providing graduates for an economy and a society which are fundamentally unsustainable. So a third way to move forward would be to transform higher education, to look at the types of research that we conduct, the teaching that we do, the types of knowledge that we value, and perhaps look to alternative knowledge systems, indigenous education in many parts of the world, to create a form of higher education that puts sustainability at the center and produces graduates that think in a different way, perhaps an industry or society would want at the moment, but who can reshape society to become more sustainable. And finally, we can look at higher education as an agent for transformation. So although universities are dependent upon national governments for funding, they can also push back in a way and create change within a society. So they can influence companies, they can influence governments to change current economic models to become more sustainable. And so obviously the fourth ideal is kind of the best outcome. It's somewhat utopian, and so like many educators or researchers in education, I think I'm very quick to advocate transformation, but the challenge is always how do we get there? How do we get to this great vision? And I think it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be incremental change. And so the best thing we can do actually is to look at what we did last year and try to improve upon it. So I'm actually a huge favor of incremental change, a huge advocate of incremental change. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. I think it's going to happen through people progressively trying to improve on what they've been doing in the past. But there's a sense of urgency to this. So we need to look at what we've been doing and really push ourselves to try and do a lot better each year. The coronavirus crisis has been a tragedy and has disrupted lives in many different senses, but it will offer us a chance to kind of think things anew, consider the situation afresh, and it will build up a whole set of experiences and abilities to work together online, as we see through this conference. So the next thing we can do is to lead by example. If we expect small businesses that are often squeezed for cash to undergo big changes to become sustainable, we need to show that universities, which are relatively privileged and have large budgets, can do the same. So we need to show what is possible, such as working together online to create meaningful change, as we're doing here. And I think that is the best way to get from where we are, between the rock and the hard place, to something which is much better. So the message here is that although internationalization as we know it is not sustainable, the answer is not to back away from internationalization, but actually to push forward, to become more international, but to do it in a different, more reflective, more intelligent way, which considers environmental costs and tries to show what would be possible if all organizations were to act as we do. So thank you very much for your time and attention. I look forward to hearing your thoughts, either online or in discussions that follow.
So that was a fantastic overview from Robin Shields, and I'm very grateful to him for taking the time to prepare that video for us. That wasn't actually live. However, Robin will be joining the Americas session later today live on the leadership panel. So if you are an insomniac, excuse me, and would like to tune into that one too, you will be able to listen to more of Robin's live insights there. But please also do feel free, if you have any questions that you would like to be put to Robin, put them through to us here in the chat, and we will try and make sure that they can be considered as part of the conversation on the leadership panel in the Americas session tonight too. it was wonderful there to hear Robin reinforce the benefits of international education and the need that is even more pressing now than ever to have global citizens. The types of skills that an international education builds are exactly the kinds of skills that we need in the world to tackle the climate challenge. So that brings me now to our next speakers, which I'm delighted to have with us, because you're going to hear now from Massey University in New Zealand and their ambitious program of sustainability and climate action. So I'm delighted now to introduce Dr. Sally Lampkin and Dr. Alana Ryan, who will talk to you about their program at Massey University.
So firstly, thank you very much. I'm Sal. This is Alana to my left, Fiora Koto. Thank you to the conference organisers and the sponsors for the opportunity to speak and have ongoing discussions around this. I'm going to talk for the first 5 or 10 minutes, the first few slides around the bigger picture of Massey in terms of sustainability and what we've been doing. I'm hoping thank you, going to allow us to carry on. So I will look at the kind of background a little bit into Massey and what we've been doing, and then Alana will develop the presentation in terms of the student literacy international education concept. So Massey has got 3 campuses. The one in the middle here is in Palmerston North, in the North Island of New Zealand. And it started in the 1920s, 1927, as an agricultural college, and then became a university in the 60s. And then in 1993, the campus here, Albany campus up in Auckland, we expanded into that. And then most recently, we have the Wellington campus here down, which was joined us, we expanded into the Wellington Polytechnic buildings in 1999. So we are very truly a multi-campus and complex tertiary organisation, and you can see the numbers there. These are the most recent numbers available to us here, which is interesting because almost half of it is the students are distance learning, and the 3,500 here, this is about 1/5 of the total number of internal. So this is a subset of the internal numbers. And the teaching expertise alongside the 3 campuses, we have over 2,000 hectares of farmland in the Manawatu, outside Palmerston North, and in Wairarapa, in the southern half of the North Island. And so obviously agriculture and the vet school are our strengths in that particular campus, alongside across the 3 campuses, social sciences, health, humanities, creative arts is very strong down in Wellington, business, education, and the natural sciences. So sustainability obviously used to be, as we all are aware, quite focused on compliance and environmental considerations, and now very much is looking across social justice, valuing cultural differences, economic prosperity, and regeneration. And at the bottom there, you'll see for us at Massey, we very much have a vision whereby sustainability is a consideration across, is embedded across the whole organisation and all the decisions that we make in any shape or form. We're very long way from that, but that is very much the vision that Solana and I have been working together for coming up a year now around developing a carbon management plan, following a commitment a year or so ago by Massey to be net carbon zero, whatever that looks like, by 2030. And that's what that looks like is part of the journey that Alana and I are developing and working towards in lots of consultation with the rest of the organisation. We have a number of sort of strings to the bow in terms of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which are increasingly important globally, and we're endeavouring to link much more of our work, not only just in the activities we do, but also the academic mission, and we have an increasing number of courses and academic modules that are based around the Sustainable Development Goals. Also, the New Zealand legislation I find quite interesting, in that it does very much support the intent of a holistic approach within this agenda. So it has the, many of you may know, the Resource Management Act back in 1991, which, though very dated now and is rapidly being updated, was at the time a landmark piece of legislation. And then we also have the Waste Strategy and the Urban Design, Land Transport Management Act, a Local Government Act, and we have a Sustainability Council that is quite core to fundamental work at the national level. And Massey also recognises the overlap and the complementary nature between the planetary concerns, the caring for people, and our aspiration to be a deterioraty-led organisation. And there's very clear synergies between the deterioraty approach of life and the sustainability agendas. And we work very closely with a lot of experts and the communities around that agenda, and wanting to bring that forward and develop that as part of the next decade in terms of our goals. And then finally, to bring it into the global engagement, which is the team of people here at Massey who are working in the international education area. And they're obviously really busy at the moment we're at this pivot point with obviously the omnipresent climate change. Then we've got the commitment by Massey to be net zero carbon by 2030. And we've introduced Digital Plus earlier on this year, which is around online teaching, which strengthens our online teaching capacity and research and promotes that direction. Sorry, I've just lost my thought for a moment. So the Global Environmental Department are very much focused on developing plans for what the future is going to look like. And we have 4 strains involved. So that's the international relations. So we've got over 200 institutions, agreements with over 200 institutions worldwide that we need to develop and look at what that looks like in the future. We have the transnational education, which Robin alluded to as well, with the offshore offerings, marketing and recruitment. We're looking at the dynamic and how that changes in terms of how we market what we're going in the future, what that looks like in terms of sponsors and processes, etc. And then the mobility, which is looking at the student exchange. So I think it would be fair to say that there's a lot of activity within that particular department, as I'm sure there are in other large complex institutions like our own across the world. And I think the thing that both Alana and I have become aware of is that perhaps a disconnect that still exists across the organisation, perhaps not surprisingly, being how we're based geographically in 3 places, and are all very much focused often in our own pockets of activity. And we're looking at trying to bring some of that together and elevate it and making the whole agenda much more visible. So it's, as we're part of almost the dynamic changing environment that COVID has presented, has talks that quite loudly and enables us to develop things in a way that are more dynamic as part of that, rather than perhaps in a static way, which makes change sometimes a lot more challenging. Though I say also acknowledge obviously the tragedy around COVID alongside that. This is moving on to the specific inventory and the carbon emissions for Massey. So the number up there, we did a accredited inventory of our 2018 figures. And as you can see, it's just over 30,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent, broken up. And because of our farms, it is perhaps quite surprising that we're unique in the way that we have just under 30% of the total is from our farms. A big chunk of it is obviously in travel, and then energy, which is quite similar to the farms. We have an aviation school, which obviously has a small bit in there too, and waste. The waste is one that we spend quite a lot of time talking about because it's visible, but in reality, it's a small percentage of the actual over total carbon emissions. And if we move to how that breaks down, we've got at the top here, the biggest one is the long-haul air travel. And a little further down, also air travel is in the top 10 4 times. We then get energy here, and we've got the farms bringing in another section, so it supports this pie chart really nicely. But obviously, this is the one at the top, which is perhaps slightly concerning, or at least gives us opportunities and challenges around how we change that. The bottom table there breaks it up into domestic, long haul and international again for 2018, looking at which is the academics and which is the non-academic number of flights, and I'll leave you to look at the numbers around it. It's really reflecting that it's not, there is a lot of scope there for us to improve our understanding around why a lot of the travel is happening. The figures that we've included up here don't include, for example, the students travel across when they're coming to New Zealand or to Massey specifically. This is the staff-related flights. And is it also research?
Yes.
Fieldwork? Yeah. Yes. So staff and students doing fieldwork around that. So there's a lot of scope, and it's ongoing discussions we have around how we can understand more about that and look at moving forward and changing what it is we need to change and what we need to make sure that we don't lose what's core to the business of Massey, and then also the opportunities of things that we can improve and do better moving forward. So the type of work that I particularly focus on is looking at the people and the culture and practices. Organisational change is my academic background. So Alana and I bring a complementary focus, because her experience, and she will talk more about that when she speaks in a minute, is around the strategic academic mission and the external partners and how Massey fits into the national and global international scenes. And my focus is very much looking at the team of 33,000 as we have, and bringing them along the pockets. Currently, we're at quite an infancy stage in terms of embedding sustainability in that mission, which I showed a couple of slides back. And we've got pockets of activity and energy, a couple of rather large departments like the vet school and the library, and COCO, which is the creative arts department down in Wellington, that have got a lot of energy and experience and activities have been going on. And we've got equally so pockets across up in Auckland as well, pockets of people who are very committed to this agenda, and it talks in their academic work or their research as well as just their personal lifestyle. So part of my work initially is joining the dots, really, is bringing those people together in conversations, along with the work that Alana does, and working around the spheres of influence of people, and the ongoing iterative process of activities over the next few years will enable Massey to, in this agenda, move into the maturity by doing small incremental changes, leading by example, a couple of the things that Robin mentioned, and enable us to make large-scale transformation changes across culture and practices. And I just was going to focus on the collaborative approach that entails, which I think is part of the disconnect I mentioned a moment ago. We need to address that. And the farms is an area where we've done, Alana and I have done some work specifically to that. And I'll hand over to Alana to explain what that might look like within the international education sector moving forward.
Sure, thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about international education and its impact on greenhouse gas emissions, but I want to start by saying, before I put any pictures up there, is to kind of say that really we've done nothing in this space. So just get that out there. We've had a few informal conversations with our colleagues in international education, part of the university. Certainly this has come up in conversation with staff and students about our climate action plan. But in terms of the focus of the work that we've been doing around our carbon management plan and a pathway to being a low carbon university, this is really not figured. So it was actually really great to get the invitation to speak today, because it forced us, I guess, to look at this issue and to start thinking about how we're going to develop this as a conversation in the university. And I'm really interested to hear what will come out of the discussions later on in the kind of question and answer session later, because I think it will help us to clarify our ideas a little bit about the space and to start working on it. So just to sort of start, I'd say one of the things we need to kind of start with is to look at what we know about Massey's international education footprint, if you like. So there's an illustration there of where our students come from currently. So that's from the annual plan last year. So we do know where our students come from. We know pretty much what they're studying, but there's a lot we don't know if we start to look at the issue around climate change and the impact of their travel. So we don't know how often students travel between their home country and New Zealand. And neither do we know the proportion of our footprint which is generated by international education, including both staff and students. So we can extract information about staff, business travel. So we have that information as part of our inventory, but we haven't done the work yet to see what that is. But at the moment, we couldn't really tell you what the carbon footprint of our international students is. However, there was a small piece of work which was done in the summer before last by some students who were trying to put together what they called a carbon strategy for the university. They did, this is very much what I would call a guesstimate, but they looked at students based on the Manawatu campus in Palmerston North, international and domestic, and they made a number of assumptions about how often they might fly home given where their residence is. So for international students, they assumed that students might go back once during the year, as well as coming at the beginning of the year, and for domestic students possibly 3 times. On the basis of that guesstimate, they've come up with a figure which includes both radiator forcing and excluding it. So if we were just to use this as a very high level ballpark bit of a guesstimate, around 14,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent might be associated with the international travel of students just from one of our campuses. So that, if we were to include that in our carbon inventory, is obviously a big issue for the university. If we don't include it in the inventory, it's still a big issue in terms of the contribution that our business has, I suppose, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So really important for us to start to get a kind of a handle on understanding, I suppose, what the size of the problem is, but obviously the more important question is what to do about that. Now, as I sort of started by saying, is that we have really done nothing in this space. And so in thinking about what to talk about today, I thought, well, if I had to think about what we were doing around the farms, and because initially that for us was an area which we needed to understand in order to do something about. So I thought, well, maybe that's a way to start thinking about how do we start thinking about what the impact of international education is on our greenhouse gas footprint, and then what to do about that. So I just wanted to kind of raise, I suppose, the question of what we've learnt from the work we've done about the farms, and then move towards what that might mean in terms of thinking about international education. So in terms of the issue of the farms, we really needed to know what to measure and what was important to measure. And in doing so, we've come to a much more nuanced understanding of where the emissions associated with our farms come from. So the pie chart on the left there isn't actually Massey University figures, but because we're still working that out. But it does give you a sense of where we need to understand the emissions associated from different animals and the different kinds of gases that are also associated with those animals. And then at the farm level, we need to understand what the emissions are on each of the different farms, because they have different farming systems. Some are more intensive than others. Some have different kinds of research on them. So that was a really important piece of work for us to do for the farms. And I started to think about international education. Well, I think we need to ask the question, what's important to measure in terms of international education? So that's still very much a question for us. So do we need to understand, and to what level of granularity do we need to understand where our students come from and how much business travel is associated with international education? I think we do, but we haven't done that work yet. And I guess there's a question which I might ask later is, from the experience of people who are in the room, virtually speaking, what do you think we as a sector should be doing in terms of measurement? So measuring is just the first place to start, I guess. Much more importantly is generating a strategic vision and then a plan for what to do once you understand what the size of the problem is. So in terms of the work around the farms, we've done a number of things which are helping us get to a position of understanding where we want to be by 2030 and beyond, and a plan to get there. So we established a farms working group, which provides oversight of the process and generates ideas. A modelling research group, which was much more focused on understanding alternative farm systems and management and the impact on emissions and so forth. We've undertaken stakeholder interviews with researchers who use the farms, because we need to understand the current practice, the concerns of researchers, and what new ideas might exist for how we could manage the farms differently. was important for us to connect with the governance body around the farm, so the Massey Agricultural Horticultural Enterprises Advisory Committee, big mouthful. Very important though in terms of finding some alignment with the way that the farms are managed and a strategic vision around farms and agriculture. And that all of those things are helping us generate what we're calling a roadmap to low carbon farms. So this will have a time frame which is mapped to the senior leadership team process. A vision is starting to emerge because of the work we've done through all of those parts of the process. And obviously we want it to be about not just cutting emissions. That's not very exciting or visionary. So what would that mean? For us, we're thinking it might mean leading Aotearoa New Zealand's transition to a low carbon agriculture and horticultural sector. And it's been really important in this process to get the right people in the room. And so in terms of the farms, that's been academics, farm managers, academic managers, external stakeholders, and students, I would add there too. So all of that doesn't necessarily translate exactly to the international education sphere, but in terms of thinking about it as a process, it starts to help me think a little bit about what we might do. And I guess coming to what we would do next is, many of you will have seen this. This is, I think, quite a nice way of thinking about the whole kind of collaborative process. If you're trying to create change, what does that look like? I would say that in terms of the farms, we're definitely at the moment in the grown zone. We're trying to understand different frames of reference, different visions for the farms, trying to marry that up with SLT, with money and so forth. And we're hoping that over time we'll get into a convergence zone where there will be a vision and some decisions, and we will be on a new pathway for those farms. Now, if I'm thinking that now about international education, I would say we're right at the left-hand side of that image. It's a new topic. We're pretty much doing business as usual. And I would like to think that pretty soon we'll start to get into that grown zone. And what would that mean? I think it would mean trying to bring an alignment between sustainability and international education. At the moment, those agendas haven't traditionally been aligned. They're certainly not really aligned at Massey currently. And then we might start to think about these kinds of questions. So going back to the slide earlier, what do we need to measure? Who needs to be in the room? How should the work connect to the university business, which is already happening, and to various committees? And if we're going to have a process around this, I'm assuming that it might generate some step change, because I'm interested in the transformation end, I guess, of things that say Robin was talking about earlier. So what process will generate that? Now for me, and I think for Sal, these are still very much questions. We don't know the answers to them. We're kind of in a space where we'd like to sort of start thinking through how to set up that process and to work that out over time. So I think I will stop there, because I think kind of hopefully raise some questions which we might be able to discuss in the next part of this session. So I think we will stop sharing our screen now and handle questions and so on.
Thank you very much both. Thanks Sally and Alana. That was really fabulous. And I suppose it makes me feel, you know, we're already winning, I think, of the fact that this event has prompted you guys to think more about how international education and your work interact is going to have some real benefits, I think. So I'd like to focus in a little bit. I'm sure we might get some other questions coming through, but first of all, I'd like to bring it back to the question of flying, because we know that in international education, our business models are very heavily dependent, or have been up until now, on binge flying, really, both in terms of the students coming in to the country, and also in terms of the way that international recruitment and international partnerships tend to be managed. So I understand you have a partnership with Air New Zealand, and I'm wondering if you could talk us through that, and also perhaps respond to some of the criticisms that are often levelled about offsetting and how that fits into the mix.
Sure. So for the last 2 years, for 2018 and 2019, the university, so at the senior leadership team level, a decision was made that we would offset our Air New Zealand flights. So that's through the program called Fly Neutral. So what that program does is, at the end of the year, Air New Zealand tells us how many tons of CO2 equivalent we've generated. So for the 2018, it was 4,667. And so we bought offsets to, I suppose, compensate for those. I would say that actually there were quite a few staff and students in the university who did think that was a bit of a cop-out, in the sense of, it's like a kind of, maybe it's a get out of jail free card, or makes us feel better.
Us included.
Other staff have been actually appreciative of it, because they say it does make a difference. And in a sense, we tried to choose projects that, so about half of the projects that that were funded by the payment we made, which was about 120,000 New Zealand dollars for that year, were Indigenous plantations in New Zealand, and then some were some international projects to do with solar stoves. I can't remember what the others were. So we're very aware that there are issues with that approach, and so one of the things we didn't really talk about was that we're looking at using carbon insetting as a university, which would mean that we would have an asset that we would grow Indigenous and exotic hardwoods together, which would be a permanent forest, which would create an asset forever in the sense of sequestering carbon. It could also be useful for researchers who do work on forestry and agriculture and the combination of them. So a decision hasn't been made yet about that as an approach, but personally, I think that's a better way to go than buying carbon credits, because it does give us an asset which has a lot of benefits beyond simply sequestration and making us feel good.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yes, and I love that carbon insetting approach rather than offsetting. And one of the things I remember being so impressed by when I first read about some of your work was that you were trying to take this really holistic view of what is needed across the whole institution in order to reduce or eliminate potential sources of emissions. So, for example, you were looking at investing in better audiovisual technology so that you could actually do some of your core work virtually rather than having to fly. Is that something that you've found that you'll continue to do in future?
Most definitely. I think it's part of the core business moving forward. The Digital Plus, which I believe what you're referring to, is being very heavily invested in, supported across the board at senior management and lower down. And yes, it has created a dynamic of change and uncertainty, and we're part of that process of discussion across the academic colleges around how that falls out. COVID jumps into the same situation. We've obviously got very strong online teaching as a university anyway, so there's a strength there that we can develop. So there's plenty of scope, and I don't know whether Lana wants to add to that, but definitely very cool business moving forward, and very exciting in terms of potential, in terms of keeping the international education agenda.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think it was really interesting as well to hear about how, there hasn't necessarily to date been a really close alignment between international and the sustainability streams of work within Massey. And I think most universities and most educational institutions are probably in a very similar boat. And I think that there will be a kind of convergence of those two over the next few years. I think it has to happen, but you're obviously at the forefront of that. And I wonder if you could just give any comments on what you see the potential role of the international office at Massey could be. Are there ways that they could be your ally and actually help support you in your push to make changes across the university?
I would say that personally, many of them working in the office are personally committed to the sustainability agenda, and so we have had informal conversations. I think at the moment they're in a process of trying to understand the big shift that COVID really is making everybody think, and at the moment there's a sense in which they're very busy doing kind of catch up, and it's there's stuff which is right here in front of them and having to cope with as a university. So and I don't feel really confident at the moment to kind of be able to say what the next step would be, but I'm certainly aware that because of their own personal commitment, they are understanding that things are going to change anyway, that actually the thinking that we're doing around sustainability and having low carbon futures might actually give some impetus to their work, so that it provides a sense of we can't just keep doing what we have done and kind of just fixing things up a little bit at the edges. We've got to think about this radically differently. So, I mean, in a way, this is kind of a perfect moment to bring the two genders together, because it's really a problem, but it's also an opportunity. So you know, I'm hoping that will start to happen.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And thank you both so much for your time today and for putting in so much preparation and for sharing your insights. It's been really valuable. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was fabulous. And now we're going to have a bit of a change of tack and look at study abroad. You told us in your poll that you're interested in study abroad. So we're now going to show you a couple of videos from study abroad providers who have actually managed to incorporate sustainability and climate action into some of their work. And if you have got any questions for Julian O'Shea, who provided one of these videos, I believe he's online and already actively chatting, so you can get your questions ready. Okay.
In January of 2020, Global Experiences launched its Green Initiative. The purpose of this initiative is simple: become carbon neutral by 2025 in response to the overwhelming global climate crisis. To begin, we determined that our main focuses would be, first and foremost, offsetting the flights of all interns on our programs by supporting diverse climate projects, and second, adding a green education to the intern experience, from start to finish. We believe that in a world where our individual and collective actions make a difference, it's our duty to implement green and sustainable practices wherever possible. We hope that interns are excited to make sustainable choices with Global Experiences, and that other organizations are inspired to adopt similar practices. We calculated that during the spring of 2020, interns on our programs around the world had flights that produced 338 tons of carbon emissions. We then offset these emissions with the purchase of carbon credits at no additional cost to the interns. The projects we chose to support are reforestation in Australia, safe water access in Rwanda, and wind power in India. We're proud to help interns reduce their carbon footprints and prioritize sustainability through these important projects. As for the green education part of our initiative, we incorporated resources for interns to use throughout their programs. Their pre-departure orientation contains resources about how to be green in their cities, how to pack and travel in a more sustainable way, as well as how to reduce and recycle while abroad. Upon arrival, their orientation emphasizes these key topics and engages them with green challenges throughout their time abroad. While our green initiative is just getting started, we're so excited to see where it takes us and to continue adding new processes to meet our challenge of carbon neutrality by 2025. In the words of our founder and CEO, Global Experiences was founded to make the world a better place, and we can no longer deliver on this vision without a serious commitment to protecting the environment.
I'm Julian O'Shea, and I'm the CEO of Unbound. We're a social enterprise that leads international education projects around the world, and we have a passion for sustainability and community development. So something that we give a lot of thought to is our climate impact, and it bothers us about how many emissions and flights we need to do to deliver our work. So we've been giving a lot of thought on what positive impact we can have in this space. And our biggest and most ambitious project yet had its inspiration, quite rightly, while leading a global program in Thailand. Anyone that's been to Bangkok has probably experienced the chaos and the joy of tuk-tuks as they zip their way through the chaotic streets. And that's where inspiration struck. Our goal was to design a literal vehicle for change, something which would address mobility, an important part of the climate change equation, by creating an alternative. A zero carbon, silent, emission-free vehicle to tell the story about the positive impacts that we can have when designing solutions to climate change. So working in partnership with RMIT University and a group of engineering students, we designed this vehicle. Powered by the sun and able to plug into the wall to use renewable energy, the Solar Tuk is a vehicle that has the ability to communicate the positive solutions to climate change in a way that's not wonkish or confrontational. So after we built this incredible vehicle, we went on a journey, an outreach adventure from Melbourne to the Great Barrier Reef, driving at a top speed of 50 kilometres an hour to engage with communities, school groups and the media to talk about climate change in a positive and upbeat way. Our voyage started from Melbourne and we made our way through Victoria, travelling through the small towns and rural areas of the state before heading to the coast, driving through our nation's capital, up into Sydney and north. Now our goal for this was to both communicate our own story of innovation, design, technology and solutions, but also to get young people in the community thinking about their own local solutions. Along the way, we met with amazing organisations that are doing brilliant work in their own community, from renewable energy to sustainable design. And we found there's a lot of passion for this issue and that people are open to new ideas and new approaches. For us, it was a chance to tell a story in a unique and interesting way, to reach these parts of Australia that we wouldn't normally travel, and to show that sustainable transport is a viable option. If we can make our way from Melbourne to the Great Barrier Reef, then people can absolutely get around their neighbourhood and to shops and work in an electric vehicle. Now the technology performed remarkably well. With a Tesla battery in the back and a positive attitude, we made our way the entire length of the country. Now the only limiting factors were high heat in Queensland due to the weather, due to tropical storms and washed out roads, and finally bushfires. And I think there's something poetic in the fact that the technology is there, the will is there, and the only things that held us back were weather conditions due to climate change. So I urge all international educators to think about their work, think about what their skills, knowledge and talents are, and how they can help create their own vehicle for change.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Well, I think we have our new slogan for the event, be a vehicle for change. I love that line, and I love the Tuk Tuk project and the other project that we heard from there with Global Experiences. So we've already heard from a range of different players in international education, people who are working to incorporate climate issues into study abroad programming or to offset and reduce their own emissions. And we've also had an overview of how the climate crisis is playing out and might affect international education overall. So it's time now for us to have another poll and ask you another question, which is, how confident do you feel in your ability to actually make change? How confident are you that you understand the climate change issue and the available solutions for international education? So the question options that we have are highly confident, somewhat confident, and not at all confident. And I'll give you another couple of seconds to keep voting there. We've still got votes coming in. Okay, I'm going to close the polling in a second. Here we go. Okay, and the results are in. Okay, well, that's actually probably a more positive picture than I expected, so that's great. 70% of you almost are somewhat confident, 69 in fact, whereas only 10% of you are highly confident and 21% are not at all confident. So obviously we hope that today, by the end of today, you will feel more confident, but clearly we still have a lot of work to do as a sector to really address these issues and build the capability collectively to take more action. So now I would like to change tack again, and we're going to look at one of the core ways in which international offices and international operators can actually reduce their emissions practically while still maintaining their business. And of course, in the current climate with the COVID-19 situation, the next topic of virtual recruitment and virtual engagement with students and partners overseas is even more topical. So I'm delighted now to introduce our two next speakers who are from Education New Zealand. And we have Dan Smith, who is the Director of Channel Services and Partnerships, and Ian Howden, who is Director of Marketing Platforms and Campaigns, who are going to share with us their insights from their leading work in this field.
It's a pleasure to be here, and it's Ewan. Thank you.
Yes, and good afternoon from Wellington, everyone. I'll start today's presentation. Really nice to speak to you all today. Myself and Ewan will be talking about digital first attraction and marketing. First, a little bit about Education New Zealand. Obviously, many of you in New Zealand will be aware, but just for our international colleagues, Education New Zealand is a Crown agency responsible for creating a thriving and globally connected New Zealand through world-class international education. We do this in a number of ways. We foster international awareness and demand for a distinctly New Zealand way of learning and problem solving. In addition to that, we target, filter and support high-value, high-quality prospects through the immigration journey. And we also work with a range of industry, government, and other partners to ensure international students have an excellent experience and ultimately become advocates for New Zealand. We speak to a global audience. Education New Zealand has 15 focus countries, and we have staff permanently placed in many of those countries. However, our digital marketing systems allow us to deliver our brand experience and engage with audience right across the globe. And we're becoming more and more targeted in our definition of what the right student is as our role as an agency continues to evolve. And this targeting is really quite relevant to the conference today, as our global research consistently demonstrates that our intended audience has quite a clear and emerging set of values that are increasingly influential when they make their decisions as to where to study. We know that much of our target audience considers a country's commitment to sustainable practices when they make their decision as to where to target. And one of the reasons much of our audience does want to study in New Zealand because they value the future between kaitiaki, a genuine care for people and place, not just now but for future generations, i.e. sustainability, and ingenuity. So our research makes us increasingly aware that Generation Z fear for the future of the planet, they value their education, they worry about their future careers, and they want to make the world a better place. They are looking to create their own path and make their own impact in the world. And they want to make a positive, lasting contribution and use their knowledge and smart thinking to doing so. So they are focused on their future, but they are also focused on the future of the planet and are motivated by outcomes and results. We know that New Zealand is a long plane ride from just about anywhere. And we also know that many students will take this as a consideration factor where they're deciding where to study, and we need to be aware of that and we need to confront that. So moving forward, we will need to outline New Zealand's ongoing commitment to sustainable practice and the work we're doing. Still some ways to go there, but we know that we need to address that issue as we continue to promote New Zealand as an international study destination. We also know that the audience we are targeting are constantly changing in their behaviours, and it really evolving at quite a bit of pace. In the past few years, there have been some significant shifts in the way people conduct research and learn about international education. For example, according to Kantar TNS research, in 2013, online communities and social research was the 13th most influential information source. Around about 5 years later, that had come down to second. A general web search is now the most impactful information source for those looking to study overseas. And ISB research has indicated about half of students looking to study in New Zealand consider an institution's website the most influential information source, and has indicated about half of students looking to study in New Zealand consider an institution website the most influential information source. We know that students we are targeting automatically expect quality, informative, engaging, and online content that is tailored to their specific needs and highlights the things that they personally value. COVID-19 has further accelerated and emphasized the need for quality digital engagement with students, particularly given the paucity of other recruitment options at the moment. And the current crisis has really demonstrated to us the value and contribution that digital recruitment can make moving forward. So In order to better align with the needs of our target audience, ENZ has recently rebranded to increase our engagement with them. We thought it'd be useful to quickly show you our brand video in which we look to match our spirited, determined and pioneering personality with the students we are currently targeting. And although we don't explicitly say it, you will see nods to some of the environmental values that many in Gen X hold.
New. It's so much more than just a word. It's what the world needs. Because new is out to shake the world up for the better. New thinks for itself, asks the tough questions, and acts together. New is prepared for today and ready to create tomorrow. New welcomes open minds and offers a different perspective. New is confident, collaborative, creative. New is progressive and never stops learning. New is the dreamers, the campaigners, the innovators, the go-getters, the problem solvers, the new thinkers. I am new.
I am new.
I am new.
I am new. I am new. New is what the world needs. New is a New Zealand education.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Yeah, apologies for the sound there, guys. Hopefully you got the gist of that. So this slide here, really, it's telling us something we all hopefully know, that Gen Z, they're the first generation to only know a digital world. But not only that, we reflect on this the other day, they're also the only generation that's grown up not knowing anything but climate crisis. To them, it is a real and immediate threat, and it's all they're known. They've also been at the heart, of course, of driving climate action. And so they've got some fundamental values and outlooks that are quite different from previous generations. And for us as an international study abroad destination marketing agency, we've got to be relevant for them. Next slide, please. We've got to find ways to demonstrate values of our brand that align with what their values are. Next slide, please. And so about 4 years ago, we embarked on a digital transformation journey on how we go about doing the business of destination marketing, how we go about the business of conveying a digital brand to the digital world. And we've done that through a very smart use of a range of algorithms and a digital ecosystem that spans the entire customer journey, from first consideration when they're dreaming about studying in New Zealand, to hopefully choosing New Zealand, and then whilst they're here studying. And then as they go on into the world to further their careers, we stay in touch with them. Next slide, please. And forgive me if you hear occasionally in the background, I've got young children at home who are intent on distracting me. And so, yeah, like I mentioned, that's from first touch point when they're dreaming in the social space, because these students heavily live in the social place, through to choosing New Zealand, and then whilst in Nomai. Next slide, please. And that manifests itself in a student customer journey like the one I'm going to talk to here. So Mary Ross is a real student. She first joined in with us in late 2017. She signed up to find out more about studying in New Zealand. She went through a range of our email campaigns, which are all automated campaigns, hopefully answering the questions about why would you choose New Zealand, why would you consider studying here, or why would you send your child here. But she then went quite quiet. She really didn't engage with us for nearly a year. And this starts to me represents often how long it takes in a decision journey. She then re-engaged with one of our global campaigns at the end of 2018. And then she went through one of those algorithms I mentioned earlier, which is a matching algorithm. So there are 60,000 options in New Zealand to study if you're going pan-sector. And traditionally, Mary would have had to have traveled probably intercity to go and talk to an agent to map out what options were available to her. And of course, with the lens of a New Zealand's attraction sort of profession, often they'll be put into a different market. But she did all of that probably from her own bedroom using our matching algorithms. She then chose a course and got matched at EIT. She reached out, connected to them through our platform. We could see with our first of its kind connection with immigration that she got a visa. They then sent emailed out to her to invite her to join the Know My program, which is for while she's studying here. And if you look at that, that's over a 2-year customer journey, and she's still engaged with us, and it's a digital first one. So this is our model, and I don't think it would ever replace entirely the physical connections, because there's a lot of, it's all about people, of course, but there are a lot of points in this customer journey over 2 years that were traditionally a physical, real world one that she often would have to travel for. You think events, intercity, which this can complement and in time replace to some of these students, if you particularly think about the values that we mentioned earlier. Okay, next slide, please. Now, how do we do this? This is our tech stack. Now, of course, I'm the first to admit this is a very overwhelming slide. It's got a lot of boxes and arrows and plumbings and things, but this is what it takes to do an enterprise level experience like the one we just talked about. It's got a whole bunch of things in there. It's got automated marketing, it's got chatbots, it's got algorithms, it's got numerous websites, it's got partnerships with immigration, of course, our provider institutions here in New Zealand, a range of global technology platforms and smart algorithms. But at its heart, it's all about trying to engage an audience, in this case, a particular person, with an experience that's fit for them, right place, right time. Now, this is enterprise level, but there are lots of things within this that you can actually pick up yourself. There are quite a lot of free versions of, say, automated marketing. Chatbots are easy to stand up, but this is how we do it. Now, bringing it in, next slide, please. Bringing it in to something more timely for in this immediate place is around the COVID response. So we have over 40,000 students here in New Zealand still studying. And during the lockdown that we've recently come out of, or still on horizon 2 of it, they were quite isolated. Many of them had only just recently come to New Zealand, and they didn't quite have the social connectedness and the networks around them. And we flexed our whole ecosystem to try and enable them to talk to each other and stay connected in a digital environment. Of course, they have their own platforms, but at a government level, this was our effort. And here's a little video of 4 students and telling about their story during lockdown that we enabled.
I'm from Vietnam.
I'm Nileshwari from Amchi, Mumbai.
My name is Sivya Shastri. You may call me Sivi, and I'm from India.
Hi guys, I'm Cindy, originally from China. How have you been coping with the lockdown?
So I feel really scared for my parents, and every single day I have to call them. People like in India, women who are being with their family all their life, giving up that and living alone is the biggest challenge that I've faced. But actually, I feel very, very, very confident right now that wherever I go in the world next, I know I'll survive and I know how to take care of myself. What has been the most challenging thing for you?
I think the most challenging thing for an international student is different studying cultures, because mostly New Zealand students have to study on their own, which is making me feel like lonely sometimes. And I really like stuck, but right now I just more adapt to the studying, and I feel more comfortable studying this way because I gain more knowledge. What would your advice be to other international students?
So I know all the universities have a lot of resources to help the students, and all of these are free to international students. So I think it's very important to using the resources from the university.
If you're home, as long as you're here, you should feel welcome. Engage with your batchmates, engage with your classmates, keep in touch, keep yourself updated, and you keep engaging. We are out there to look out for each other. We all in this together.
Cool, thanks, Dan. So hopefully you can see that whilst we have got a large focus on offshore attraction and preference for country building for New Zealand, we still have a large role of experience here in New Zealand, because ultimately if these students have a good experience, they will then advocate to their peers back home. And having a digital first platform to enable that is immensely powerful. And it's not unique, but it's quite a special place New Zealand holds in the world in this space. This is another example of students connecting with each other through our communities. We have what we call Kiwi ambassadors, which each intake of students each year, we just ask the audience of who's interested to help pay it forward and tell the story of their experiences and be available for questions and for live streams. We do a lot of that now in the social space to connect with these Gen Zs, because that's kind of where they live. And we've also recently set up a Facebook group, which was about studying in about looking to study in New Zealand, but now it's a support group, and that's going really, really well. And it's predominantly students talking to prospective students and others about their experiences and how they can help each other. And there's a wide range of questions in there. So we're really pleased with how that's going, and it's another tangible example of how a digital-first capability and access to audience is also helping people stay connected and have a good outcome. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Okay, and just a little bit more on some of our partners who help us in terms of recruiting students to come to New Zealand and marketing to students to come to New Zealand. We know that as well as students, education agents are increasingly involving the way they market and they recruit, and are increasingly starting to combine the more traditional recruitment work that they've often done with the digital content that is available. And we can see that they're starting to demand a bit more from their providers around the digital collateral and the connections they are provided with. Around about 9 out of 10 agents consider the availability of an online application service important or very important, according to ICIF in 2018, and that was the first time that had come up as something that agents were really focused on. And just as a little example of this, ENZ has an agent engagement platform called Agent Lab. So 3,700 agents have registered for Agent Lab since July 2019, and once they're registered, they can access news, documents, courses, and webinars. What we've really seen over the past 3 or 4 months as COVID has really taken grip and has been something of real concern for agents and students parents, is that agents have been really hungry for information, and they've gone to digital platforms to find that information. So regular webinars are run through Agent Lab, and our most viewed webinar on the platform, specifically around what to do in Alert Level 4, that was the purpose for that webinar, has been viewed almost 1,100 times. And of course, the benefit of digital platforms, and Ewan has talked about this as well, is that they can be tailored towards current events and agents' immediate needs. Within Agent Lab, we launched a COVID-19 specific FAQ page, so agents could start to get the information they want. And by no means is Agent Lab the primary contributor to this, but a recent kind of high-level survey that we did through Agent Lab, we sort of learned that 97% of agents were satisfied or highly satisfied with COVID-19 related information provided by New Zealand education providers and Education New Zealand, really demonstrating the effectiveness of digital channels and really getting across information and the things agents need. So that's a really great indication of how important digital recruitment, digital communication, and digital marketing can be.
Great, thanks, Dan. So where to from here? You know, we're operating in a highly complex and dynamic environment, particularly, of course, with COVID, but even irrespective of COVID, the Generation Z and those that are coming behind them, they are foremost focusing on the value that they can grow for themselves and alignment that they need for choosing an offshore study destination around the sustainability and environmental impact. And that's not a small thing for us to navigate as a country, with Dan's comment earlier about us being at the bottom of the world. You know, that's a existential threat almost for us, particularly for these audiences. So we're definitely going to be leaning more into the digital space, not solely, but we'll be continuing to iterate, test and learn, find new ways of offering the same sort of experience that once traditionally would have been a physical experience, you know, particularly around fairs and conferences. Personally, I wouldn't see them replacing solely, but they definitely complement those. We're in advanced discussions in China with Tencent. They've got a enterprise level conference platform that we're exploring with them to enable some kind of first of its kind experiences in that space. And of course, working with our sector and students to look for more services that they can find, that they're going to find useful. And probably one last one that we're exploring actively is what a blended learning environment could look like with digital and physical experiences. So thanks everyone for your time. It was a pleasure to share the story with you. That's all from myself and Dan. Of course, we're available for any questions that you may like to ask us.
That was absolutely fabulous. Thank you. And obviously, yes, you must be feeling very well we don't have much time, but I do just want to pick up on one question that's come through in the chat. And that is, what comes next? And if you could focus particularly in your answer, please, on what are the emerging technologies that you might want to look at next?
Shall I have a go, Dan?
Sure.
So one front of mind for us is around a concierge, a virtual concierge, to help you navigate that digital customer journey and learning experience. Yeah, we've got a first foray of that with a chatbot is smart, but what we're looking at is an AI-powered virtual human as an example, because people still need to interact with a person and receive, be able to ask questions and get intuitive responses to navigate the complexities of what they want to study and when they're studying. They'll never replace people, I believe, but we're actively exploring how a virtual human may help supplement and complement in certain areas of that learning experience, and how we can introduce that through our ecosystem. So it's probably, from my perspective, a big play that we're exploring.
Fabulous, thank you. And sorry, if I could just pick up on one question as well that's come through the chat, which is, have you done any work to try and measure what the carbon footprint of virtual recruitment is in comparison with traditional forms?
Dan, have you got anything around Air New Zealand's discussions?
No, so we're as an agency, we're beginning that journey as well, to understand a little bit more what our emissions are and things we can do to, I guess, reduce those, and the role of digital recruitment in that process. Like you heard in the previous presentation as well, we are in discussions with Air New Zealand and others to try and measure some of that, but no, we haven't done any formal research on that at the moment.
Great, thank you very much. It sounds like there's going to be a new emerging job opportunity in future for people who really are good at A, managing virtual events, and B, can really are specialists in measuring the emissions involved in various aspects of international education. So there you go, top tip for people who want to look at new courses. Okay, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, but thank you very much, Dan and Ewan, for your time today, and it was really fantastic to have both of you contribute to that. And obviously, it fits so well with the Think New platform and approach as well. So we're going to move on now to a different topic again, and this is the first of our topics that actually looks more at the student perspective. So we know that students are increasingly concerned about climate change and demanding climate action. And we know that this is a difficult topic that can engender anxiety in students. So our next piece is going to look at their research into student climate anxiety and what might be done about it.
Greetings from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, California. My name is Dr. Ann Campbell, and I'm an assistant professor, and I'm here with Thi Nguyen, a master's candidate. We are pleased to share this presentation as part of the International Education Climate Action Summit. The title of our presentation is Climate Anxiety and International Student Mobility, Overcoming Eco-Paralysis. We will begin by sharing our main takeaway messages with you. After that, we will define key terms and explain our interest and position in the topic. Then we will discuss the three main takeaway messages again in greater detail towards the goal of moving beyond climate anxiety and eco-paralysis and towards climate action in international education. So right at the beginning, here are our three take-home messages for administrators and faculty, which we will return to and explain in depth later. First, we recommend that practitioners and faculty acknowledge the concerns of young people in terms of climate anxiety and eco-paralysis. Second, we advocate for practitioners and faculty to recognize and address the links between social justice and the unequal impact of global warming. And third, we encourage administrators and faculty to advocate for climate action, both during and after the Education Abroad program, as a way to address climate anxiety and to help the planet.
Thank you, Anne, for the introduction. So there are two key terms that are important to this presentation. They are climate anxiety and eco-paralysis. Climate anxiety is the chronic emotional distress induced by climate change-related events. It stems from the growing awareness of the direct and indirect environmental impact on individuals' lives. Eco-paralysis is a state of feeling overwhelmed by climate change and not knowing what to do about it. In the context of this presentation, we will combine climate anxiety and eco-paralysis as one single phenomenon. This phenomenon refers to the immobility of students' minds in the face of climate change, despite the physical mobility. What usually happens is, in deciding whether or not to pursue opportunities abroad, students would almost always feel conflicted, knowing that their educational travels contribute to polluting the planet. Due to their under-addressed concerns, many students choose skepticism or ignorance as a coping strategies, which is counterproductive to both student learning and environmental sustainability. So before diving deeper into our study and recommendations, Anne and I would like to make clear our positionality on this particular topic. We both come from a graduate institution in California that deeply values international exchange and cross-cultural learning. As international education specialists, we believe that global solidarity is needed now more than ever to prepare the next generations to tackle global challenges, such as climate change. Our values also stem from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 4 and 13. These two goals, when placed side by side, demonstrate the purpose of education as supportive of both student mobility and a sustainable future, which show us that going global and going green should not be viewed as two contrasting narratives. To us, there are new frontiers regarding the role of international education that have yet to be thoroughly discussed. Therefore, we are eager to exchange ideas and learn from other people at the conference.
So from our observations in the field and our work with students, we see signs of anxiety and eco-paralysis among our students and colleagues. And from our perception, it seems even more pronounced in the younger generation. And while we don't have all the answers, we do think that things can be learned from the research and program design that has come before us, and from conversations like the ones happening during this conference. We have some initial ideas to put forward today as considerations to live with climate anxiety and to move beyond eco-paralysis towards action for the planet. Our first recommendation for administrators and faculty is to acknowledge that their students may be experiencing climate anxiety and that they and their students and colleagues may have eco-paralysis. This means addressing these concerns in classes and through program design and across disciplines. The academic literature seems to support the idea of eco-paralysis and climate anxiety among students today. Kelly found that those who take environmental studies courses, especially for the first time, find the lessons to be crushing. Yet Kelly noted that few classes in the study help students handle the emotional stress of climate change or allow them to, quote, feel empowered and ready to take action after class, unquote. Moreover, Robinson found that while faculty are aware of the importance of addressing climate change topics in their curricula across disciplines, that university educators were unprepared to be involved in extensive interdisciplinary teaching and preferred to teach within the safety of their own subject boundaries. Verily provides one idea here as a way forward, arguing that faculty should guide students towards a, quote, live with climate change, unquote, approach to channel the feelings of guilt, frustration, and grief towards fixing the flaws and injustices in the existing systems. Based on these points and other findings, we recommend that faculty and administrators acknowledge and incorporate issues related to climate change and climate anxiety into education abroad programs, including helping students to live with their climate anxiety.
We also believe that there's a need to address a link between the environment and social justice, as this approach can help bring different students' communities together and motivate them to commit to climate action. From our observations, many students are indeed tirelessly trying to identify a course of action to tackle climate issues in their own education. In 2016, when Fisher conducted interviews with youth climate activists, he found that positioning climate change as strictly an environmental issues, such as flying less and saving the polar bears, greatly undermined the wide range of life experiences and perspectives that had shaped this field. In 2014, El-Zabi and El-Ansari found that students in the Netherlands were highly concerned about global warming, but their worries were linked more directly to the inequitable impacts of global warming. And they understood that combating climate change was also about fighting for the rights of underprivileged groups. From these findings, we believe that eco-paralysis and climate anxiety can be enhanced when students are aware of the environmental toll of climate change, but are unable to connect this aspect to their own individuals' lives. This can be a very isolating experience. To support students, international education programs should incorporate curricular lessons and approaches on our global interconnectedness and environmental justice. In this way, students can envision using their own education as a way to not only give back to environmental causes, but also contribute to the socio-economic well-being of the larger society. In doing this, we can further bridge the perceived gap between student mobility and sustainability.
Our third recommendation is to advocate for climate action both during and after the Education Abroad program. So for example, Dvorak and colleagues argue that faculty members leading study abroad programs should be responsible for framing productive discussions with students and other institutional stakeholders and partners surrounding sustainable choices in study abroad. Buckley and colleagues argue that education abroad taught, quote, critical sustainability principles that would be difficult to replicate if students did not leave their home university, unquote. However, while education abroad might be transformative, the ways that students can implement these new lessons at home were not addressed. Paradoxically, if students return home to face structural or cultural barriers to implementing these new sustainability lessons, this could potentially lead to increased feelings of disempowerment and anxiety. In our review of programs, we found many great examples of campuses who were incorporating sustainability lessons into their curricula and on their campuses, providing opportunities for students returning from study abroad and for international students to be involved in these initiatives. We have mentioned a few here on this slide, including from the University of Melbourne and Lehigh University and Dickinson University. Later in the presentation, we'll provide a link if you want to learn more information about these initiatives.
So as you see, overcoming eco-paralysis in the space of international education requires strong collaboration among students, administrators, professors, and institutions. It takes a great deal of courage from all parties to think and act differently to improve life in different corners of the world and advance together toward a more just and sustainable society. This brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you all so much for joining us. Our contact information is on the screen.
As a final point, we wanted to share this bit.ly link. It's an open link of some of our resources and programs that we've been looking at to help shape our upcoming research project. We hope that these might also be helpful to you in your own work. Indeed, the work of helping to preserve the planet and reverse the effect of global warming belongs to all of us.
Thank you very much indeed to T and Anne for sharing with us the results of their work around climate anxiety and eco-paralysis. I love the messaging that's coming through strongly, both in that last presentation, but also through some of the other examples we've heard today about being upfront and acknowledging with students that this is a problem. There is a reason people can be anxious and should be anxious, but that if you give people practical steps and opportunities to take action themselves, then that can reduce the anxiety. And it can even be incorporated into study abroad programming, both before and after. And so essentially it's using the climate crisis as a kind of teachable moment to help reinforce some of the action that needs to be taken. So fabulous there. And now we're going to have a different topic again, and I'm delighted to be able to introduce two fellow Melburnians who are going to talk to us about the power of money and how it can be used to drive behavioural change, and also the power of building a coalition for action within a university or other contexts. So I'm really happy to have Will van de Paul from Market Forces and Dr. Hannah McCann from the Climate Justice Network, excuse me. Thank you very much, and over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Elsa, for having us, and everyone for tuning in. It's a great pleasure to be able to present today. I'm going to go first, but I will let Hannah introduce herself first, so you're not sitting there in the dark wondering exactly who else is on this presentation. So Hannah, please.
Thanks, Will. So I'm Hannah McCann, and I'm from the Climate Justice Network at the University of Melbourne, and this is a subcommittee of the NTU branch at the university, of which I'm a committee member. So I'll talk more about that in a moment, but over to Will for now.
Thank you very much, Hannah. So I have a few slides that I'm going to speak to today, but really want to keep it fairly short and snappy in describing to you the power of money, I guess, element of this presentation, and who exactly Market Forces is and what we do. So I will share these slides with you now and introduce myself properly. Okay. So my name is Will van der Pol. I am the Asset Management Campaigner at Market Forces. Market Forces is a Melbourne-based but increasingly international focused environmental not-for-profit organisation. We are an affiliate project of Friends of the Earth Australia. And basically at Market Forces, we seek to shift finance and investment away from projects and companies that would damage our natural environment and shift that finance and investment towards sustainable opportunities. So the title of my presentation, part of the presentation today, is The Power of Money. But really what it's about is aligning our finances with our values. And when I say that, it's not just our personal finances and our personal values, but it's really about using, viewing this as a collective effort to shift finance and investment and direct it in a way that is sustainable at an institutional level. So while personal action is really important, I'm here to speak to you about how banding together to drive collective action to influence institutional change is what we're all about. So the way that Market Forces works to shift information is a really simple model, and one that can be applied in basically any situation where you have a person or a group of people who want to affect positive change on any issue. We obviously operate on the financial sector and its influence on climate change, but this model is applicable across the board. So what we do is we gather and share information. Market Forces is, as much as anything else, a research organisation. For example, we do the research to find out where exactly our banks and super funds and insurers are investing our money once it leaves our pocket and goes and sits in that institution. So we present that information to super fund members, bank customers, people looking for an insurance policy, etc., and allow people to use their, I guess, consumer power to decide which institutions they want to be involved with, but then also to band together with other members of that super fund or customers of that bank, for example, to use a collective action model to shift that institution to a more sustainable model. So that's really the three elements of our process towards shifting institutions. It's gathering and sharing information, building power with that group that can influence an institution, and then facilitating action to ensure that those that want to take action and push for positive change are able to do so in the most effective way possible. So an example of this, and one that really I think ties into the CANI Summit generally, and definitely what Hannah is going to be speaking to as well, is our current campaign to shift UniSuper to ensure that its investment portfolio no longer includes fossil fuel companies. This is, I guess, a microcosm of our broader financial institutional campaigning that we do at Market Forces. So as an example of this model to shift institutions in action, I wanted to speak a little bit about the UniSuper Divest campaign. So UniSuper is the default pension fund for tertiary education sector workers in Australia. Many of you, I'm sure, are members or know of the fund. And UniSuper, we think and have had interactions with many members, basically guiding our action on this super fund, telling us that as the super fund that represents this body of, or this sector of the community, we want the fund to represent our values, and we don't want it investing in the companies and projects that are holding back the transition to a low carbon economy. So through that process, we've developed a campaign that is now obviously being run entirely online, but at one time earlier this year, it involved some actions on campuses. And basically just, it's all about gathering those members that want to take action and influence change, giving them the information and the tools that they need to be able to do that, and to do that effectively. And so I think that's an example of a sort of model that can be brought in to influence change at any institution. And so if there are climate issues that you are seeking to improve or get institutional support for, then this is the model that we use and have found really effective, and some examples of how that has been done and is continuing to operate at the moment. So, I'll leave this fairly short because I want to open it up to questions at the end that both Hannah and I can respond to. So I will finish up there. Please send through any questions and I'll hand over to Hannah.
So if you want to find us on Facebook, you can find us there. So I guess the point of this, how this connects to the forum that you've got going, is partly, you know, maybe your students want to get involved in campaigns like the one being run by Market Forces, or they want to get involved with things that staff are doing like you. We're encouraging you to kind of get involved in these things as educators that are interested in climate action. And we certainly work with the student unions as well. So it's really relevant, I think, to the last presentation that you just saw about how, you know, dealing with student climate anxiety is also something that, you know, necessitates student action, and I would say staff action as well is really important in that. So what's the deal with our group, the NTU Climate Justice Network at the University of Melbourne? Basically, we started last year in 2019 out of this desire of a few NTU members to do more about climate action on campus, but as workers, so bringing together the labour movement and the environment movement, which sometimes have been quite separate in activist circles. And so what we really started out asking as a group is, what does it mean for us as tertiary workers to take climate action? And what does it mean in this language that's kind of been around in the past year around a Green New Deal or a just transition away from dependence on the fossil fuels industry. What does that actually mean for tertiary sector workers? And so that's what we've really been kind of discussing in our group over the last year. And we've put together a number of kind of vision statements and things that you can read if you go to our Facebook page. And so what we've really come to is this idea that sustainability isn't enough. And a lot of our institutions, there's a lot of work, hard work that's been done, really important work around sustainability, you know, cutting down travel, obviously a huge concern for members of this group. But how green are our jobs in terms of the institution? And that's where something like Market Forces Uni Super campaign comes in, questions of divestment that are related to tertiary sector workers, but also in terms of our institutions, the universities. What is our relationship to fossil fuels that isn't just where we're putting our money as institutions, but where we're getting our money from? So what's funding our research? And there's a lot of concerning examples at all of our institutions of these very intense and close ties with the fossil fuels industry in terms of money directly that we get for research, but also different kind of relationships that are sometimes a bit informal, but you know, there was some news recently out of the University of Melbourne in Farrago, you can look it up, our student magazine, about earth sciences kind of having this special relationship with ExxonMobil and them coming to the university and kind of recruiting students early on to kind of work for Exxon. So these quite concerning relationships with the fossil fuels industry. And so that's why we want to go beyond just thinking about sustainability. It's about thinking about how green our jobs are. And so we've come up with 3 demands as a group. And the first one is a demand for green education. And this isn't just a demand on our institutions, this is a demand on the government. So, you know, this is about a fully funded higher education sector, which obviously has never been more important than right now as we're seeing all of this drama unfolding in the sector. But green jobs that don't need a reliance on industry funding, and particularly, you know, as one of the kind of, I guess, concerns that we have in light of COVID-19 is with all of these funding shortfalls, institutions might be looking to industry more than ever, and these existing relationships with the fossil fuels industry might intensify. And related to that, our second demand is about ending fossil fuel cooperation. So these issues of divestment, but also investment, and the relationships that are happening in these institutions, sometimes, you know, between graduate students kind of being targeted by these industries and so on. And lastly, climate justice leadership is our demand on our institution. So we want to be leaders in targeting climate change. We know that we're producing the next generation of people that are not only going to have to live with the effects of climate change, but respond to it and come up with new ideas and, you know, research to respond to that. And so we need to take responsibility for building this green future. And part of that is these other things around cutting the ties to the fossil fuels industry.
Thank you very much indeed, Hannah and Will, for that. I love the approach of looking at what's needed and then working backwards from there, rather than just looking at what's specifically our own narrow focus. So congratulations to both of you, and it's really important work, obviously. What I'd really like to ask you both is to put yourselves for a moment in the shoes of our audience. So you're an international education practitioner for the most part, you work in an international office, say, and you don't have control over the big institutional decisions around, you know, divestment or around which bank the institution banks with, or where you source your energy from. What could you do as an individual in that position to really try and make some change happen?
Yeah, so if I'll just go first and then Will can kind of answer as well. I think our approach has been to collectivize. So that's the first thing, is forming a group of people on campus who are active around these things, and then strategizing together about how we're going to kind of launch a campaign, what our tactics are. Last year, one of the things that we spent quite a lot of energy on was getting a demand happening to the Vice Chancellor to let everyone attend the climate strike without penalty, and we actually won that. So we got 900 people signed up to a petition that we wrote, and that couldn't have happened just by any of us acting kind of individually and kind of putting ourselves out there to be kind of targeted. But when you're a group and you've got kind of union support as well, and you've got these kind of big email networks that, you know, the union has access to, you can kind of get the ball rolling from there. I don't know, Will, did you want to add anything about campaigning?
Just absolutely agree that while you may feel it is a lone person acting at first, there's always others that you can join up with. And to build that sort of power is all about, you know, informing others within your close circle, so within your same office, having those discussions and building strength from within. Taking that to, you know, maybe you can get a policy position or a statement or something from your entire office that is, you know, championed by those right at the top. And I think recognizing that, you know, international offices and the international outposts of education institutions are actually really powerful bodies within, and quite viewed as really important to institutions. So recognizing that power that can come from a position that builds from yourself to those nearest to you, and then spreads across the institution, whether it's other, you know, international offices or other outposts or other groups within the organisation that can build that broad level of support that can influence change.
Wonderful. Sounds like we need a climate action network for international education.
That sounds good. And on that note, if anyone wants us, Will or I, or both of us, to kind of speak at a group that you do form in your institution, we're very happy to do that. So just find us and contact us.
Thank you. That's really great. And I appreciate your time so much. And it's wonderful to have you. I'm sorry we don't have time for any more questions, I'm afraid. But everyone's got your contact details. So thanks so much. And can I just say as well to anyone who's with UniSuper who haven't yet switched to their sustainable and green options, you really should. Not only is it the right thing to do, but it's actually over the last several years been by far the most lucrative option for your pocket as well. I can testify to that. So thank you very much, Hannah and Will, for your time. And we're now going to go to the student perspective again. We invited a range of students, international students and local students from around the world to tell us why climate matters to them.
Hi, my name's Sophie and I'm a third-year environmental science student at the University of Melbourne. I'm also an environment officer at the University of Melbourne Student Union. We all know that students and young people are passionate about climate action and want real change now. Through my work at the Student Union, I've seen this firsthand. We consistently have record numbers of students turning out to demand our university take significant and real action on climate change now. And through my studies of environmental science, I know that this action needs to be immediate and monumental. We need our universities to shift away from policies that focus solely on waste reduction and waste management and towards real action. We know that it's not that we need to reduce how much we're using, but this is not going to fix the planet, and this is not going to fix the problem that we've gotten ourselves into. We need our universities to be thinking about their social and economic ties and divesting from fossil fuels, and we need them to be setting ambitious targets on carbon reduction, and we need this to happen now. This change needs to be immediate, and our universities need to stand up and do it. Our universities have shifted and shaped the way that we live through their research, and they need to be leaders in climate action as well.
Kia ora, this is Saurabh Lama. I'm from Nepal, but I am a Master of Energy student at the University of Auckland. Yes, so currently the world finds itself in something truly unprecedented. These are very uncertain times. These are very uncertain times, but we do have to think of a future beyond the pandemic as well. And I think climate change is one of those topics that will affect generations, even after the pandemic has been a long gone memory, even when the pandemic is no longer a threat. I think climate change is going to be one of those things that will be lingering for generations to come, and it is our time to act now. So as a student, sometimes the thought does cross my mind when I think that I'm in no position of power to make any impact on the world or how people think, how the world operates. But I'm here to tell you that that's wrong. No matter how big or small our contributions are, everything does add up. And it does make an impact in the long run, for sure. So even now as a student, I'm currently looking at a renewable future for New Zealand. So I'm looking at mathematical modeling and trying to decipher or trying to gauge about how the New Zealand future looks when New Zealand is solely reliant on renewable technologies. So that is just a tip of the iceberg of the vast amount of things that students can do to mitigate the impacts of climate change. This is just one thing. We have a lot of research going on in the world. We have a lot of articles being published as we speak that has shown measures about how to mitigate climate change. Lastly, I do want to say that the world right now, human beings as a species, are living in very unprecedented times. And it has really shown that we as a species can unite in uncertain times. And it has shown that we have power to decide what our future can look like. So yeah, just reading certain things about even my country, about how mountain ranges are now visible from the capital city because the dust and the pollution levels have reduced in the aftermath of lockdown. And even now you'll hear things about animals being, the natural habitat of animals being restored in certain parts of the world because we are limiting our carbon emissions, and that does give me hope. So yeah, what I wanted to say was our actions matter, and climate action is something that we really have to think about for the future and for the generations to come. So kia kaha, climate action for today, for a better tomorrow. Thank you.
My name is McKenna Avery, and I'm from Redlands, but San Diego is my new home. I'm studying sustainability and political science. Climate action is so important to me because we can't have any other problems without solving this one first. Regarding educational travel, I want my university to adopt carbon offsets for all travel and to engage in meaningful social projects every trip. Thank you!
Hello everyone, my name is Jansil Toole. I'm currently a junior here at San Diego State University, studying international business with a minor in sustainability and an emphasis in Portuguese. And I'm originally from Northern Virginia. For me, climate action is everything. It's the number one issue our world's facing right now. And I think before we can make any progress elsewhere, we're going to need to learn how to live on this world sustainably. And for me, I think the number one thing my university can do to promote educational travel is to partner with the Good Traveler. It's a nonprofit that allows you to offset your carbon footprint from flying.
Hi everyone, my name is Mariam Liaquat. I'm an international student from United Arab Emirates studying business at Simon Fraser University in Canada. Climate change matters to me because I believe that our actions have threatened our ecosystem, environment, and community and will impact the future of our planet, causing political, economic, and social conflicts. However, we can change that. We can move towards sustainable solutions, adopt renewable resources, encourage further dialogue on climate action, and this can create positive impacts on climate change.
Can we swap the briefcases for the backpacks is what I'm asking.
Hello everybody, I'd like to talk today about international education and climate action for the CANI conference. I've been reflecting a lot lately about the importance of travel for young people and the students that I work with. And I've also been thinking about my responsibility as a business owner and a frequent flyer in reducing the amount of time I spend flying, in continuing to work efficiently and cost effectively as I have been doing the past 3 months, and in gifting young people that opportunity to travel guilt-free. I started traveling when I was 16. When I first left my country of Ireland, I realized the value of travel and how it changes people. What is it that I, as a business owner, or my colleagues working at corporations, multinationals, universities, governments, what can we do to continue to curtail our travel, to continue working as we have been doing the past 3 months? And what if we start asking ourselves, how can we continue to reduce the amount of time that we spend flying? How can we continue to reduce our carbon footprint? And how can we turn around and gift that business travel, gift all those cancelled flights, gift all those flights that we might not need to take in the 12 months, and gift that flying time to young people, to the students who deserve the chance to see the world, knowing that my reduced business travel is having a positive impact on their experience. And as a business traveller, I really feel that I can no longer ignore the impact that my travel is having on the planet. And yet this crisis has shown me, it has shown my colleagues, that we can work more efficiently, that we can reduce a few flights, if not a lot of flights, and work just as efficiently, if more cost effectively. Can we continue working the way we have been working? Limit our travel, build frameworks for sustainable travel within our organisations at the very minimum. So why not make the young people, make the students the new priority passengers? So today I'm thinking, let's allow the young people and the students to travel. They are not part of the problem, they're the solution. Let them travel guilt-free, feeling that they're not adding to a climate change problem that we have certainly contributed to. So today, can we swap the briefcases for the backpacks is what I'm asking. Thank you very much.
A lovely opportunity there to hear from some of the students themselves. And I also really liked Nori and Lucy's contribution there, which I think is a really interesting prompt to many of us to think about what is it that we could do, what ideas are out there to perhaps allow us to still allow students to have that great opportunity to travel abroad, but perhaps to look at some kind of trading system where companies and institutions look at giving their kind of flight credits. They forgo a flight in order to let students fly. Something to think about, along with another bold idea that was raised last year at AIEC from somebody who suggested a carbon tax for the international education sector. So something to think about. And I'm sure that many of those ideas and other ideas will come up in our next panel, which I'm very excited to introduce now. My enviable task here is just to introduce the chair of the next panel, Stephen Connelly, who will be well known to many of you. He is, of course, Director of Global Ed Services and was previously President of the International Education Association of Australia. And of course, his most notable role to date as my former boss. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Ailsa. I had forgotten that. Welcome everybody to this session of the 2020 International Education Climate Action Summit. I'd like to thank the event sponsors and partners for helping to make the summit possible. This afternoon's session is called Pressing the Reset Button, COVID-19 as an opportunity to transition international education to a more sustainable future. I believe we are one of the last things standing or sitting between our virtual audience and virtual drinks, so I'll not waste time on lengthy introductory remarks. Before I briefly introduce our panelists to you, however, I'd like to just activate our virtual audience for this final session, and we're going to run a brief poll, which will appear on your screens shortly. Hopefully, I will be able to see it. There it is. Okay, so for the benefit of the recording, the question we're asking is, what will be the shape of global higher education in 10 years? And respondents are able to select up to 3 options. So again, for the benefit of the recording, and whilst the audience is selecting their options, I'm just going to read briefly the options. Students will have a greater say over the design of their course. The physical location of a course will be less relevant. The physical location of a course will be more relevant. Institutional track record on sustainability will have a greater impact on student choice of where to study. Once the pandemic crisis is over, global higher education will slowly return to normal. Competition for fee-paying international students will be as intense as it is today. The coronavirus impact on international travel will speed up adoption of sustainable practices. Virtual study abroad will cater for more students than those who travel overseas for short-term study experiences. Institutions will invest more in internationalization at home, and transnational arrangements will become more attractive to international students. So I'll just wait a few seconds for that poll to finish. And Petulia, whenever you are ready, we can close that poll, and hopefully I will be able to see the results. And there they are, the results are in. So very interesting. The number 1 option in response to the question, what will be the shape of global higher education in 10 years? 65% of respondents indicated that students will have a greater say over the design of their course, what modules, and whether to study them on campus or online. In second place, if I look down very quickly, 50% of respondents indicated that institutional track record on sustainability will have a greater impact on student choice of where to study. Closely followed by, in third place, the coronavirus impact on international travel will speed up adoption of sustainable practices. So some very optimistic responses from our respondents there. Thank you very much for that. So as I said, this session is entitled Pressing the Reset Button, COVID-19 as an Opportunity to Transition International Education to a More Sustainable Future. Our presenters are, in order, Rebecca Hall, who is Global Lead for International Education at Austrade, Brett Berquist, International Director at the University of Auckland, and Corey Peterson, who is the President of the Australasian Campuses Towards Sustainability, but also has a day job as University Sustainability Manager at the University of Tasmania. So Rebecca, Brett and Corey will consider the broad issues of leadership and driving change across the sector, and if we're very lucky, we may be able to get them to do some crystal ball gazing to tell us what the future might look like from a sustainability perspective. Yeah, in fact, I have a crystal ball here for exactly that purpose, so we'll might be using that later. Each speaker will present for no more than 7 minutes, and at about the 5-minute mark, I'll ring the bell. Lots of props here, so that speakers will know how much time they have left. Audience members, you can post questions in the Q&A channel or comments in the chat channel. I'll monitor both of those, and as each speaker finishes, if there are relevant questions, I might pose 1 or 2, and then we'll have a few minutes for further Q&A at the end of the session with a hard close at around 2:50 p.m. And so to our first speaker, Rebecca Hall from Austrade. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks a lot, Stephen, and great to be part of this virtual panel today. I'm going to try and share my screen. So thanks so much for the opportunity to be part of this panel. I'm putting my timer on as well, so I don't run out of time. But did we ever think, in a matter of months, our collective global efforts to contain COVID-19 and the resulting economic slowdown have, at least for the moment, reduced humanity's ecological footprint, something that many of us have been aspiring for and working to? And I think an interesting comparison is in both COVID-19 and in climate change. It is the world's most poorest and vulnerable who suffer the most. And so I think the challenge that you've set us today to talk about pressing the reset button gives us an opportunity to look at that from both lenses and also what that means for us inside our specific countries, but also globally. So I'm going to focus on two questions today. What does pressing the reset button look like at a macro, and apply it to build a more sustainable education experience? And in doing so, I'll draw on my role as Austrade's Global Lead for International Education, but also as a trainee of the Climate Reality Leadership Program as well. So we know many governments have taken some decisive action, some might have said drastic at the time, to manage the spread of COVID. And I think at a macro level, we have a window of opportunity to make some of those changes stick and to craft policy that will enable us to transition to a fairer and more ecologically sustainable system. And you might ask, why am I sharing this in this presentation? Hopefully you can see my next slide. I'm sharing this because this isn't just about the movement of students or our institutions. This is about how we structure our economy, our societies, and what we value. And I'm including a quote here from the chairman of the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, noting that we have a phenomenal opportunity to address two issues at once: decarbonise the economy as a long-term game, but also to do so in a way that creates significant jobs, and of course, as you would expect in his line of business, look at energy and how individual countries may be able to use that as their next superpower. I would actually suggest that Australia and the world has another valuable renewable energy, and that's international education. Our graduates are and can power the world. And so resetting following COVID, I think, can also enable us to make bold choices in setting the right policy and the right funding environment that can lead to a more sustainable international education sector. On the next slide, I want to just share what we're seeing here in Australia in terms of the 4 factors that we think will shape Australia's international education. And I'm just sharing them here for context because I think we can't move to the what's next without dealing with what's right here in front of us. So again, quite macro level here, obviously for us in Australia, how we progress along the 3-step roadmap towards a COVID safe Australia will ultimately determine what's next in the short term for our institutions and for students. But of course also how well our source countries and or competitors recover, health, economic, politically, will obviously also impact those who may want to continue studying and prospective students and partners. I heard some earlier presentations, of course, another key factor is how our student and parent buyer behaviours might change during this time. And I think there are a lot of correlations that we've seen in terms of students' perceptions on climate change, also on how we're managing COVID and how a society places value on certain aspects. And then finally, for many of us who are still managing large cohorts of international students with us during the crisis, how those students experience their education, whether they're with us or whether they're online, and what that means for our branding and reputation. So I'm going to turn now to, I guess, the second question. What can we take from the global response in COVID and apply it to building a more sustainable international education sector? And I want to focus on 5 critical resets. And I haven't got a slide for these because I've actually been changing them as I go and think about this as well, because I was trying to also make sure that this doesn't just apply to Australian education, but is also relevant for those in other destinations. So the 5 critical resets, I'll start with number 1. And number 1 is, and I think as our previous speaker just noted, we've actually shown we can travel less and deliver more value through better integrated planning, recruitment activities, partnership activities. In Australia, that's really important given how far away we are from the world, but also how many agencies and organisations are involved in the promotion of international education. This is a great opportunity for us to actually meet the climate action need, but also deliver greater value to our students And to meet a need for our institutions as a destination agency, we know our institutions will have less resources, more work, less people. And so how we can actually support that through better coordination and engagement. I think that's critical and something that quite well here in Australia. I'll go to the next slide and just build on what our colleagues from Education New Zealand shared as well, that this is a chance for us to obviously transform the way that we run our traditional events, the way that we recruit, the way that we share our insights and connect with student audiences. So I've just included here some of the priority actions and pivots that Austrade has been leading on behalf of the sector during COVID, and what that might mean as we move forward. And with many of these, including our Study with Australia initiative, actually contributing to a more sustainable sector. So the second reset, I think, is, and I mentioned it earlier, but I need to call it out again, focusing on revised governance models and funding models for our institutions. This has shone a light, COVID has shone a light on the reliance of many of our institutions on international education, and this is a chance to have a serious conversation about that. Stephen's told me time, and you know I'm only up to my second point, so I'm going to close really quickly, Stephen. The third reset, I think, is the cloud becomes our biggest campus and our most effective channel to share knowledge. And it's not an either or, it's actually an enabler, and we've shown we can do it, and I hope we continue to do it. Number 4, we actually are going to we need to produce new and different kinds of graduates who have the skills that we need to address the new world that we want to create. And I think we've shown how quickly we can move with product development during COVID, and I can't wait to see what more we can do. Finally, number 5, we have shown by our decisions, by the changes we've made in governance, in finance, in political risk and appetite, we have the ability to react quickly to a crisis. And I'd love to see that we make this not by design, not by disaster, but by design.
That's terrific, Rebecca. Thank you very much. And a wonderful moment there when my message to you appeared on everybody's screen that you had run out of time. So that's one for that, one of the records. We'll just go, Thompson Chung has actually sent through some excellent questions, but they're general and of relevance to all the panelists, I think. So I'm going to leave them to the end and just ask Brett Berquist to jump in and give us his presentation. Brett, over to you.
So really nice to be with you all today. I think I'm here for the institutional perspective of it all. So I'm going to speak a little bit about what my institution is doing and why this all matters to us. And then I'm going to pull it down to a very pragmatic, rubber hits the road. What does it mean for an international educator who is basically in charge of delivering recruitment KPIs? How do we reconcile those two things? When I moved to New Zealand a few years ago from Michigan, I had been commuting 350 kilometers per day from my office. It was complicated, change jobs, kids in school, that sort of thing. So I got down to New Zealand and I rent a place near my office in the CBD. I walked through a park to my office, no car, working on my carbon karma. Then I started traveling for work. And I went, oh my God, I'm going to be in purgatory forever. I mean, you know, down this part of the world, we define our work trips by how many sleeps. You know, I used to think a trip from New York to Europe was a long one. That's nothing here, you know. So just the sheer scope of what we're trying to achieve and how we do that means that climate action is a really important part of international education. At my institution, we're the flagship university of New Zealand. We have 8 really wonderful institutions in New Zealand. University of Auckland is a little bit bigger with about 45,000 students. Of those, nearly 9,000 are international students, and 1 in 4 of our undergraduates does study abroad during their studies. So international education is a pretty big deal, big part of what we do. And we've been focusing a lot on SDGs, particularly in how we report on them in the different ranking systems that are coming forward. We were really pleased to be #1 in the world in the Times Higher Global Impact ranking when it first came out in 2019. About half of the market was in. And we were really worried this year when we saw all of the market come in, but we retained our #1 ranking, largely because we do very well on number 17, where we have a lot of partnerships for international education. And it was cool to see the dominance of down under institutions in this year's rankings on the SDGs. But also at the same time, many of us, just like Auckland, Elsa always points this out. Whenever I crow about our SDG ranking, I can hear Elsa Lamont's voice in my head saying, yes, but what about number 13? Because we didn't submit in 2019, we didn't submit in 2020, but we're going to submit in 2021, just to know where we are. And I think that's the case for a lot of institutions down under. Several of the other New Zealand universities did pretty well, and Australian ones, but it's increasingly important. But we want to talk about what does that mean for an office which is in charge of the traditional things an international office is? What impact does this have on recruitment? Does it really matter? You know, are all of our markets inspired by Greta Thunberg, or is it only some of them? Is that something that's temporary? Is it going to go away, or is it here to stay? What do we need to be doing with that? Well, so what we thought was there's so many parts of this that are beyond the control of the international office. So why don't we start close to home, get our house in order, take a look at what we're doing. Let's start by counting. Who knew it would be so difficult for me to figure out just how much my team flew last year? It took us 6 months, actually, but we had someone come in. There's a brand you might recognize, a certain consultant who happens to be the organizer of this summit, came in and took a look at what we were doing, gave us a scorecard. I wasn't happy with all of the grades he was giving me, but anyway, kind of told us where we were lacking, where we needed to focus, and then gave us a series of recommendations. And she was able to come up with the count of exactly how far we flew and the mega amount of carbon emissions that related to that. So concretely, what are we doing here? Really, we're focusing on things that have been coming up during the previous talks, right? So virtual recruitment, that's here to stay. We're all in the middle of it right now. This is what our days look like all day long. So we're investing a lot in that area. We had already been working on some ways to reduce the amount of printing we're doing and shipping, you know, more customized digital printing. Something a little bit more original is we're looking at some options for giving a gift, you know, giving someone a certificate that we planted trees for them instead of giving them our stuffed kiwi like we usually do. We've also been increasing our offshore staffing, having people closer to those markets who aren't getting on a plane from New Zealand to service some of our agents in Beijing, for example, is not only more cost effective, but also helps our carbon footprint quite a bit. And then, of course, we're looking at the traditional offsetting options. You heard Massey talk about the steps that they're taking after the fact. We also believe that the more noble road is to inset these things. But in the meantime, you got to start somewhere. So we actually now finally have a report with a price tag, which allows me to make some decisions for offsetting all of my international office travel. Right now, that's going to cost me $0, a pretty easy decision, but I have committed budget to do that going forward. We're also going to be offsetting our outbound student travel and trying to put in place a way to make it easy for our inbound students to opt in at their cost to offset their travel on their way to New Zealand. And we actually think that's a really interesting space for ENZ and the rest of our colleagues in New Zealand to be. And finally, we're educating a lot. We're doing some programming around Generation Climate Action to really get our students who are here, the study abroad students we host, and our outbound students to focus on that and to think about where they want to be in that space. So it's a lot of things we're doing, a lot of things to think about, but we really feel that this is going to become increasingly important in our ability to deliver our KPIs. And that is bringing international students in, facilitating mobility of our international students, and then educating our stakeholders overall. So with that, I've really focused not so much on the philosophical side or crystal ball of the future. I've tried to bring some very concrete steps. What does it mean where the rubber hits the road for someone who manages a significant team, significant budget, delivering KPIs? How do we get our head around this? And I hope that's useful for others. Thanks.
Straight to Corey. We've had another excellent question come in from Sue Ganapati, but again, I'm going to leave the questions, they're quite wordy, to the end because I think there's a general application for our panelists. Corey.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this amazing session. I'm learning a lot just listening, and then the sessions before this have been fantastic. I'm just trying to get my screen to share. You can see the first slide. What is sustainability? Okay, excellent. So I'm just going to step back to basics very quickly, and I know I'm probably preaching to the choir, but there is a method in my madness. Sustainability has a lot of definitions to it. I know we're talking about climate action, and you've heard from Rebecca and Brett as well that there's an understanding that you know, climate action is nothing without a further and broader understanding of sustainability, from climate justice through to environmental outcomes in what universities do, whether that's student travel or staff travel, as Brett was just discussing. And Brett, I'm from Minnesota, so I ended up in Tasmania and you ended up in New Zealand. Quite interesting. And what I want to point out here is you often see a Venn diagram that equates environment, culture, or social and economy, and sustainability is what's in the center of that. And in fact, if I can get my slide to work properly, the reality of the situation, as we know through this COVID epidemic, the wave concept, and you see some of the memes out there, where the big wave is climate change behind COVID, and a second wave of COVID. So this is a better model, and it's what I always discuss with people, and I always disabuse them of the notion of a Venn diagram, that in fact you don't have an economy unless you have a society, and you don't have a society unless you have a stable environment. So it's really important context in our discussions today, that what we're talking about is ensuring that that green circle has some level of stability or normality to it that we can count on, so that we can have stable societies and therefore have stable economies that allow students to travel around the world and staff to travel around the world as well. You've heard a lot about the Sustainable Development Goals today. To bring that model, this is from the Stockholm University Institute Resilience Center at their university. And that just puts some context around those SDGs. We often see them all 17 sort of listed together, but it's really an important point to make, that the goals have layers to them as well, that match up with that nested diagram that I showed you. And climate action is obviously number 13 there in the green, and that is at the very base level of what we need to care about. That's why this climate action network is so important, because at the end of the day, without a stable climate, we're going to have a hard time maintaining any stability in anything else we do. So why do we address sustainability in the university sector, or anywhere for that matter? A lot of it is stakeholder expectations, which I'll delve into in a little bit more there, but reputation and attractiveness, which ties into the former thing around expectations. But there's cost imperatives too. Flying is not cheap. Getting students here and housing students is not cheap. We have long-term viability issues. You know, we are not-for-profit technically institutions, and therefore, you know, we shouldn't, and most don't have a major profit motive other than ensuring our long-term viability. And then the emerging issues there, we have supply chains, Modern Slavery Act, social responsibility things. Climate emergency is what we're talking about today. Biodiversity loss is a big thing, and human health could come into that very much so right now. So we have a lot of stakeholders to integrate with our activities within the sector, but students are a major part of that. And I just want to reflect briefly on a survey the UK has been doing for quite some time, the National Union of Students, which is now Students of Sustainability. And they've been running an international survey for over 10 years. Over 50,000 students have participated, and over 80% expect universities to act on sustainability. And when they mean act on, they mean lead. So there's some expectations that our sector should be leading in responses, and I went the wrong way there. And then at the University of Tasmania, where I work, we have done 3 student and staff surveys. So we've had over 5,550 students. 89% expect us to maintain our certified carbon neutral status, which we've had since 2016. We're one of only 2 institutions in Australia to have that certified status for scopes 1, 2, and 3, and 80% support divestment. So there's a lot of pressure there to do some things. I'll just briefly touch on the University of Tasmania's emissions, and this is really important. To be certified, you have to do all of your scopes 1, 2, and 3, and I won't delve right into what those are at this point, but suffice it to say, scope 3 is a major component of what we do, and within that is a lot of that is air travel. And for our university based in Tasmania, we fly everywhere. We have no trains. The boats that we do have are very slow to get even to Melbourne. So air travel is 21% of our emissions portfolio, right up there with our electricity use. So it is a major issue for us around air travel. and then staff commuting. So transport's very big for us, and we've been focusing on that for some time, reducing it. We as a university, in order to maintain our carbon neutral certification, and everybody would have to do this, you can do everything you want to minimize your carbon emissions, but at the end of the day, you're going to have residual emissions, and you're going to need to offset those. And that is, you look at climate change globally, you look at carbon globally, and if you can reduce your emissions from somewhere on the planet, that counts globally, is how we look at it. We try to value add in our activities and our offsets. So we target areas where we have international students, so we give back to those communities. We try to ensure that biodiversity is right up there. If we do anything around forests or plant-based things, biodiversity and community development need to be part of that and have certifications as well. We don't just buy trees, as it were. And then we support renewable energy. So there's a lot of things that we can do as a university and as a sector. So Australasian Campuses Towards Sustainability, every year we have a physical conference, except this year we were supposed to host it in Tasmania. And we always have a certified carbon neutral conference, meaning we do buy offsets where we can't reduce emissions. So there are things universities and organizations can and should be doing. And maybe I'll just leave it there, Stephen.
That's a lot of information packed into 21 minutes, thanks to all of our panelists. Now, we've had some questions come in, as I've said before, and I'm going to ask one of them to Rebecca and one to Brett at this stage. So Brett, just as a heads up, in a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask you to deal with the question posed by Sue Ganapati. I think you can see them. Rebecca, Thompson Chung has asked 3 questions, so well done, Thompson. I'm only going to ask one of them. And that's the third question. His question is, would the panel be able to comment on political will and leadership in driving changes for a sustainable future? Now, I'd like you to apply that to international education, but I want to also put just a commentary around that. The Australian Government Roadmap to a COVID-safe Australia, which is on one of your slides, stage 3 mentions consider cross-Tasman, Pacific Island and international student travel, which is interesting. There might have been a lot of people sort of cheering that the Australian government was paying attention to student travel, but as a cynic, I think it also flags that the Australian government has no plans to alter its approach to higher education funding and therefore needs universities to rebound in terms of international student numbers. So that, I think, makes Thompson's interesting. Political will and leadership in driving change, Rebecca.
And that makes it a challenge for me, given obviously my role in government is with the trade, the Australian Trade Commission and focused on international education. But I will make two points on that. I do think Australia's National Cabinet and how we have approached managing during the crisis, so all state premiers as part of a national cabinet, actually is a welcome addition to how we govern in Australia. And that political will collectively of how our premiers and our ministers are working together is an opportunity that we want to make the most of. Now, I can see your face, Stephen, as well. It doesn't mean we agree on everything.
No, actually,
but
I think
it does mean there is an opportunity for us in that. Those 2 words, international students being included in the COVID safe plan and the 3-point plan, yes, very important, but also to note that that doesn't mean in July we are open and we have open borders. There is a long way to go, as everyone understands. So I think one of the challenges for international education at this time is not only political will, but community sentiment and how the community understands the value of international education. Because I think there is a lot more we need to do as a sector. We look at how the tourism sector is responded to or understood in terms of the need for support. And international education, certainly in this country, contributes a significant amount, and combined, those 2 sectors are our 3rd largest sector. I spoke about energy in a purposeful way as well. They are our biggest renewable energy sectors at the moment in terms of that value. So I want to answer his second question quickly too, because alumni, absolutely. Our power is in our graduates, our impact is in our graduates, and alumni play a key role in helping shape that as well. So I'd love to see more strategies that involve alumni helping us and also doing that work back in their home countries as well.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. And just for the benefit of people listening and the recording who can't see the questions, Thompson's second question was, do you see a role for international alumni as influencers within their respective areas, organisations beyond the international education sector? So a couple of excellent questions there from Thompson. Now, Sue Ganapati has also asked us a question. Although virtual platforms and interconnectedness have gained popularity and posed excellent opportunities, could this also adversely affect globalisation and increase behaviour barriers as government imposes country and state lockdowns and social distancing policies? So, Brett, you've had a couple of minutes to sit there and think about that. What are your views?
Does that mean I'm supposed to be more brilliant than Rebecca since I had 2 minutes?
Yes, unfortunately.
Oh, damn. Oh, that's a tough one. Hey, I think it's a really good question, actually. But I think the thing to focus on here is that none of this is new. So we were doing virtual platforms, virtual recruitment previously. We were already in the middle of looking at ways of limiting travel. This is a way to, on a positive day, you focus on the silver lining. This is a way to kind of leapfrog us forward in a direction that we were already undertaking. Now we're doing it out of necessity, out of pressure, not by choice. But in many ways, it just gives us a whole new impetus to what we were talking about before. Someone was saying, I think it was Rob Lawrence. No, Rob Lawrence quoting Rebecca Hall. Oh my God. We should be thinking about renewal, not recovery, right? That was you, Rebecca, I think. I didn't hear you say it, but it was Rob Lawrence quoting Rebecca Hall. Renewal of the international education industry, not recovery. We're not going to go back to where we were. The things we're doing currently, we were doing previously. It just gives us a chance to really fast forward to where we might want to be. I think at the end of the day, some of the nationalist tensions we might be seeing, actually all that's simply going to strengthen the core values we have in international education. The things we care about, they're not going away, they're going to get stronger as a result of all this. And obviously the whole interconnectedness of the world is, if there's anyone on the planet who doesn't understand that now, where could they be, right? I think the difference though is that the means to achieve our ends are going to remain more diversified. I was pleased by the most popular response on the poll that Stephen put up at the beginning, right? More choices, more modules, including choice of location, more power in the consumer, more power in the student's hands, right? So I think isn't going to change things fundamentally. I guess maybe one of the biggest benefits I would see is that the stigma, people debate this, right? But fundamentally, you don't always have the same career outcomes with a fully online degree as you do in an in-person degree. Same thing for T&E, branch campus degrees versus at the location. And with the whole sector, 90% of students in the world going online for an extended period, many of our institutions will reset a bit, but retain much, much more activity in that space. And perhaps that will reduce the stigma that's there. And perhaps it will shift some of the economic differences we've seen. One of the conversations we've been having in New Zealand is if we were to reset the number of international education students, we would need to fundamentally revisit the funding model of our institutions. Now, of course, this is something the vice chancellors talk about a lot, but given the scope and the breadth of the focus on it because of the economic crisis, it's also a new opportunity to have that conversation around, who's funding and who should be funding higher education. So I think in that regard, there's a lot of benefits which will simply reinforce our core values, but diversify the means by which we reach them.
Great, thank you. And I've been given a couple more minutes. And Tony Smith has asked a really interesting question. So Corey, I don't know if you can gird your loins and give us an excellent 60 seconds in response to this. Tony's asked, some research has shown that the use of augmented reality and virtual reality in education can result in higher productivity and learning ability of students. It's said that such technologies help transform boring learning into an engaging and interactive process. Question is, do any of the organisations represented here, so UTAS or any others that you're aware of, Corey, use VR or AVR to deliver courses? And I guess the next question is, if so, how's it going?
We have at the University of Tasmania done some exploratory use of it. I don't know, I can't comment on how well it's gone. I'm pretty sure we haven't rolled it out broadly across our current response to the COVID activities. We generally have been using it to engage younger people in the idea of pursuing higher education rather than as a teaching tool into our current curriculum. Now that may be changing at this time. Yeah, so that's a very good question, and one that I think will come to the fore as Brett was discussing. You know, we're going to have to come up with new ways of doing things while still understanding there's value in how we were doing it before.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that. Can I just make some closing remarks in that case with 1 minute left on our time? Firstly, a big thank you to this session's presenters. 3 really excellent presentations, and as I said earlier, a lot of information packed into 21 minutes and given us a lot to think about and some perspective on possible futures. Just again, bouquets to the event sponsors and partners for helping to make the summit possible. To Zoom, I know we're only at the beginning of our new relationship, but you've very quickly become an important part of all our lives, and we love you. To the audience, thanks for Zooming in this afternoon and for your future efforts to tackle climate change issues in international education. And finally, to Ailsa Lamont, whose energy and commitment are the driving forces behind this summit. Congratulations, Ailsa. Good job, and back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And it's certainly not just me, but we'll be introducing the rest of the team very soon. And thanks very much, Stephen, and the rest of the panel. That was just absolutely fantastic. And we are going slightly over, but we hope to be finished very close to on time. So do stick with us for just the last few minutes. I'd just like to recap some of the main points that we've heard throughout the day today. Firstly, there are real practical levers that we can pull. There is influence that we can exert. Secondly, we need to factor the carbon cost of the business of international education into our decision making, and a lot will flow from that. Thirdly, we're able to make more powerful steps if we do it collectively. And we hope that CANI will be able to provide a possible forum to help bring people together to share their ideas. We don't all have to reinvent the wheel. Now, to help shape the next direction and future CANI actions, I'd just like to do 2 final polls. So can we go to the next poll, please, Petulia? Great. So this one is very specific. How could CANI help you? Would you like us to provide more live events and training, provide networking opportunities, produce written case studies and guidelines, or anything else? And pop that into the chat function. And CANI really is an organic group. I wanted to say a loose group, but that could be taken the wrong way. There's no membership dues, there's no governance structure. It's a bunch of people who've got together because we want to do something about this. So if you'd like to be part of CANI, please do get in touch. There are no membership guidelines. Anyone who wants to just put their shoulder to the wheel is more than welcome. Okay, so let's close the poll and see what the results are. Okay, so it looks like people are interested in getting more written case studies and guidelines, and potentially in more live events and training, and also networking opportunities. That's great. Thanks very much for that. And we certainly will be taking into account some of those possibilities. And already some of the major international education conferences have been talking to us about ways to perhaps combine in order to have some kind of combined climate action event at some of the next big conferences. Okay, let's go to the next and final poll for the day. And that is to look at what actions would you like to see prioritized when it comes to climate action in international education? Should we prioritize increasing awareness of the issue, measuring emissions, reducing emissions related to student mobility, reducing emissions related to international student recruitment, educating international students, or leading change across the education system? And of course, these are not mutually exclusive, but let's see what you would like to see as the priorities. Okay, we're going to stop that poll now and let's have a look at the results. So, let me just put my glasses on for a second. Excellent. Okay, so leading change across the education system is a clear winner there with 76%. And then increasing awareness of the issue. So there's still clearly a job for us there in doing more to make people aware. Other key contenders are reducing emissions, both relating to international student recruitment and mobility. Okay, so that's the final one of our polls, and that's been very informative, and thank you very much indeed for taking part in that. So one last opportunity that I'd like to share with you is the Climate Reality Project's training. So the Climate Reality Project, as I mentioned earlier, is one of our sponsors. So we thank them. And that's a foundation that was set up by former US Vice President Al Gore to catalyse and amplify climate action across the world. And they run usually 3 or 4 very large face-to-face training events every year, where Al Gore attends and actually leads the 3-day session. And today you have at least 3 alumni of that training program involved. So Petulia Nicola, who will come out from behind the curtain soon, and myself have both gone through that training, as has Rebecca Hall, one of your previous panelists there. So I'm sure there may be others in amongst the group, and it's a fabulous, fabulous opportunity to learn more about the climate crisis, what you can do about it, but also very importantly to create a network of people that you can rely on and work together with to try and do more in your field. So that climate reality training is about to go virtual. So I think that you should be getting the link to that shared in the chat right now. So please do check that out, and hopefully there will be an opportunity for you to perhaps join that training. It's a really fantastic event, and I'm sure it will be even online. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is to close by thanking everybody. And if we could just have perhaps our final, oh no, not quite our final slide. I'd like to thank our sponsors again, who are of course the Climate Reality Project, the Lord Mayor's Fund for Melbourne, Education New Zealand and the University of Auckland. I'd like to thank our event partners and all the people who have helped to promote the event. There's a huge range, and I'm sure I'll forget somebody, but I do feel that the following deserve a real mention, and that's CAPSI, the Canadian Association of Public Schools, Austrade, the International Education Association of Australia, Taper Design, Edukudu, Settled Services, San Diego State University, AIEC, the PI, the Practera Study Melbourne student team, who kicked us off on this project by providing us with a social media strategy. There have been so many people, so thank you to them. But more than that, none of this would have been possible without the incredible production team that you can see there. So these are all the people who are currently, they're all online now, and I'm just about to ask them to turn their cameras on so they can wave at you. But these are the people that you need to thank. Everyone here has put in countless hours of their own time without any pay. So please join me in thanking everybody here, and everyone please turn your cameras on. Okay, so a huge thank you to CJ Tremblay in Vancouver. Also in Vancouver we have Diego and Elise, to Eddie West and Adrienne in San Diego, and of course that North American team is about to go live for their session in a few hours, I think 3 o'clock in the morning Melbourne time. Do tune in, especially if you're not insomniac. And for the Australia-New Zealand leg, here we have Sao Ganapati, but more than anyone else, Pituli Nikula, who has been the power behind the scenes. Thank you, everybody. That's a wrap.